Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Lost Heart. It was on a typical Tuesday afternoon, with a thick, almost suffocating silence settling over the small bookstore that I first encountered the book. I had been rummaging through dusty, old shelves in the farthest corner of the shop, looking for something that would catch my interest. The faint smell of aged paper filled the air, a comfort I had come to enjoy, but there was something different about this particular section. I paused as a strange sensation washed over me. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and a low hum seemed to reverberate through the wooden floor beneath my feet. My heart beat just a little faster, but I brushed it off as a result of spending too much time in the dark, musty corners of the store. It was then that my eyes fell upon the book. It was tucked away in the back of an old wooden shelf, hidden among forgotten volumes. The cover was a faded, dark crimson, with intricate golden symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The title was not immediately legible. Its letters were faded and smeared, as if someone had tried to erase it. But despite its worn appearance, there was an undeniable pull, a magnetic force that drew me closer. I reached for the book, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it from the shelf. The moment my hands wrapped around its edges, I felt a strange chill, as though the book had absorbed the coldness of some distant, forgotten place. As I flipped it open, a sense of unease began to build inside me. The pages were yellowed with age, brittle to the touch. The text was written in a language I couldn't recognize, but the symbols seemed familiar, almost as if I had seen them before in fleeting dreams. I hesitated, wondering if I should leave it behind, but my curiosity won out. I tucked the book under my arm and approached the counter. The bookstore owner, an elderly man with a perpetual frown, gave me a long look before ringing up my purchase. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, before he asked, "Are you sure you want that one?" "It's not a book to be taken lightly." His words lingered in my mind as I walked out of the store, the weight of the book pressing against my side. I couldn't explain why, but I had the feeling that something was about to change. Something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. When I arrived home, I set the book on the table, the anticipation building in my chest. There was no logical reason to feel this way. After all, it was just an old book. But as I opened it once more, I felt my vision blur. My head began to spin, and a sudden dizziness overtook me. I tried to shake it off, but the room around me began to shift. Shadows grew longer, stretching across the walls as if they had minds of their own. The air grew thicker, suffocating in its heaviness. The quiet hum I had felt earlier seemed to grow louder, vibrating within my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. And then, slowly, barely perceptible at first, a soft whisper echoed from the dark corners of the room. "Leave now," it hissed. "Before it's too late." My heart raced as I slammed the book shut, the words echoing in my mind. What had just happened? What was that whisper? I glanced around the room, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, moving in a way that couldn't be explained. I quickly closed my eyes, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling that had taken over. But when I opened them again, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The quiet whispering had become a cacophony, a chorus of voices that seemed to grow louder and more urgent with each passing second. The book had already begun to change me. The room was still. Yet, somehow, I felt as though it wasn't. The air around me seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the walls themselves were alive. My hands were clammy as I slowly stood, the feeling of being watched overwhelming. I reached for the book again, determined to understand what had just occurred, but when my fingers touched its cover, my vision blurred once more. This time, the darkness swirled into something tangible, an enormous, faceless shadow rising from the floor, looming over me. I gasped, pulling my hand away, my body shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Yet, the fear didn't fade. It lingered, heavy and oppressive. Something terrible was coming, and I was in its path. The days that followed were nothing like before. I could feel it in every corner of my apartment, in every shadow that stretched across the walls as the sun began to set. The book was now a constant presence, its weight pressing on my mind and soul. I couldn't bring myself to open it again, but I couldn't leave it alone either. It sat on the table, a cursed object in my home, a silent reminder of something I was too afraid to confront. The whispering had not stopped. At night, when I lay in bed, trying to sleep, I would hear it, soft at first, like a distant murmur, but it always grew louder, clearer. The voices would call my name, pleading with me to open the book again, to finish what had been started. But I knew better now. I couldn't. Every time I even thought about it, the air around me seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. And then there were the dreams. Horrible, vivid dreams where I was trapped in an endless maze of corridors, the walls pressing closer and closer, suffocating me with their dark presence. I would run, but the shadows always followed, always closing in on me. The faces of the damned would appear in the dark, their eyes hollow, their mouths open and silent. Screams. I could never escape them. Every time I woke, my body was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispering turned into something else, something worse. It was no longer just a faint murmur in the night. Now, it was a constant pressure on my mind, a sensation of being watched, stalked by something I couldn't see. I started to question myself. Was I going mad? Was this all just in my head? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself unable to ignore it any longer. The book seemed to call to me, the pages whispering secrets I could never fully hear. The temptation to open it again was too great, and despite the fear that gnawed at my insides, I reached for it. As soon as my fingers touched the cover, the room around me seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with the smell of something ancient, decaying. I felt the weight of countless eyes on me, the presence of something watching from the dark corners of the room. The pages turned by themselves, and as I read the words I couldn't understand, a strange sensation began to consume me. It was as though something was trying to reach inside my mind, to take hold of my thoughts and twist them into something unrecognizable. My head spun, and I staggered back, but the book's pull was too strong. It wouldn't let me go. And then, I heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from somewhere deep beneath the floor. It started as a soft scratching, like claws against stone, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. The noise echoed through the apartment, vibrating the walls, shaking the air. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in terror. It was as though something was crawling beneath the earth, making its way toward me. I dropped the book, stumbling backward, but the noise didn't stop. It was joined by something else, a soft, clicking sound like the tapping of large, many-legged creatures moving across the floor. My heart raced as I looked around, my mind struggling to make sense of it all. And then, I saw them. In the dim light of my apartment, I caught the movement in the corner of my vision, shadows, dark and shifting. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the shadows grew larger, more solid, I realized with growing horror that they weren't just shadows at all. They were creatures, massive and twisted, their glowing eyes gleaming in the dark. I couldn't move. The creatures, gigantic, twisted rats, emerged from the floor, their bodies sleek and shadowed, their glowing eyes locked on mine. Their jaws snapped open, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. Their claws scraped against the floor, the sound like the gnashing of bone on stone. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The rats were coming closer, their movements slow but deliberate, as though savoring the fear that emanated from me. I backed away, desperate to escape, but the shadows seemed to stretch farther, closing off any possible exit. Then, the voices returned. This time, they weren't whispers. They were loud, clear, and they came from all around me. A chorus of anguished screams, their words unintelligible but filled with an unbearable sense of dread. I was trapped. My mind raced, trying to find a way out, but nothing made sense anymore. I reached for the door, my hand shaking, but as soon as I touched the handle, the rats lunged. Their eyes glowed brighter, their claws sinking into the floor as they crawled toward me with terrifying speed. I knew then that I was no longer in control. The book had opened a door, and whatever was behind it had already begun to seep into the world around me. The darkness had come to claim me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the glowing eyes of the rats, watching me with a hunger that filled the entire room. And then, nothing. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was dark, save for the faint, eerie glow that seemed to seep from every corner. I was lying on the floor, cold and disoriented, my body aching as though I had been dragged through the very fabric of some twisted nightmare. My chest heaved with shallow breaths as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The rats, the voices, the book. The memories hit me in waves, crashing against my mind. The terror, the endless presence of those glowing eyes, the sharp scrape of claws on the floor, and the unholy whispers that seemed to wrap themselves around my very soul. But the worst of it wasn't the rats, or the creatures that had surrounded me. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something had followed me back from that terrible place. I slowly pushed myself up, my head spinning as I looked around. The apartment seemed unchanged, but the air was different. Thick, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The walls felt closer now, as if they had shifted while I had been unconscious, or maybe I was just imagining it. But no! The air was heavy, charged with a presence that made every movement feel wrong. I felt the shadows, the darkness, gathering in the corners, creeping ever closer. They weren't natural, they were alive, hungry, aware. The book was gone. I searched the room frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. It had to be here. I needed to find it. I needed to understand what had happened to me, why I had been dragged into this nightmare. But it was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished, leaving only the lingering sense of its presence in the air. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A soft scratching, like the same clawing that had filled the room before. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was coming from the walls. No, not the walls, the floor. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. It was them again. The rats. They were coming back. But why was I still here? Why hadn't they taken me with them? I grabbed a chair for support, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. But then, something moved in the darkness. A shadow, impossibly tall and thin, stretched across the room. Its outline was distorted, warped, like it didn't belong. It shifted, twisting and turning as if it were alive. I couldn't look away. The shadow seemed to reach for me, its presence pulling me in, drawing me closer, despite the terror flooding my veins. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, caught in the pull of its dark gravity. And then, it spoke. "Come closer," it hissed, the voice a low, rasping whisper that scraped at my soul. "You belong with us now. You cannot escape." I felt the air grow colder, the space around me contracting as if the walls were closing in. The shadow was not just a shape, it was something more, something ancient. A presence that could not be fully comprehended, an entity that existed in the spaces between worlds. And it was calling me, pulling me toward it. But then, something broke through the fear. A small, flickering spark of clarity in the chaos. The book. The whispers. The creatures. They were all connected. This was no coincidence. I had opened a door. The book wasn't just a collection of words and symbols, it was a key. And whatever had been unleashed, whatever I had seen in those dark corners, it was not just a part of the book's curse. It was something far older. Something that had been waiting. I snapped out of my daze, my heart racing with newfound urgency. I had to escape. There was no other choice. But as I turned to flee, the shadow lunged, its form expanding, enveloping the room. Its tendrils reached out, winding around the furniture, twisting through the air, cutting off every path. "You cannot leave," the voice rasped. "You belong to us now." I ran. There was no other option. I bolted toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, it twisted. My fingers froze against the cold metal. It was locked. But I hadn't locked it. Behind me, the shadow began to take shape, its form growing more distinct, more human-like, but its features were twisted and grotesque, a reflection of the ancient, unspeakable things that dwelled in the dark corners of the earth. I turned, and before I could even think, the shadow lunged forward. It seemed to stretch impossibly long, reaching out like an arm made of darkness, closing the space between us in the blink of an eye. A sharp pain exploded in my chest as the shadow wrapped around me, its tendrils sinking deep into my flesh. The cold was unbearable, freezing me from the inside out, spreading through my veins like poison. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only feel the crushing weight of its presence pressing in from all sides. And then, just as quickly as it had come, it stopped. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, but the world around me was already beginning to blur. The shadows had taken hold, and the cold seeped deeper into my bones. I had failed. I hadn't escaped. And now, there was nothing left but the darkness. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the faintest whisper, just barely audible. "Your heart is ours." And then, nothing. I woke to the sound of my own frantic breathing. My eyes snapped open, but the world around me seemed different, distorted, twisted, like a dream teetering on the edge of nightmare. The air was thick with a coldness I couldn't explain, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I struggled to move, but my limbs felt heavy, as though weighed down by some invisible force. The room was darker than I remembered, the shadows clinging to every corner with unnatural tenacity. I could hear the faint scratching sound again, just beyond the walls, just out of sight. It was closer now, as though whatever had been lurking in the shadows was waiting for me to move, to make the next mistake. But I didn't want to move. I didn't want to look. I wanted to stay hidden in the warmth of my ignorance, to pretend that none of this had happened, that I had never opened that damn book, never stepped into the world of nightmares. But I couldn't escape it. The darkness had taken root, and it was pulling me deeper, twisting my thoughts until they no longer felt like my own. It wasn't just the shadows anymore. It was the weight of something inside me, something ancient, something waiting to break free. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me, and I crumpled to the floor. I gasped for breath, my head spinning with confusion. What had happened to me? Why did everything feel so wrong? The walls seemed to shift and pulse, as if the very structure of the apartment was alive, breathing with me, sharing in my terror. And then, I saw it. It was subtle at first, a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. But as I turned my head, I saw it clearly, a figure standing in the doorway, watching me with eyes that gleamed like molten silver. It was tall, impossibly tall, its features obscured by a shroud of darkness, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me, as though it were looking straight into the deepest parts of my soul. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was no escape. The figure was already here, and it had already found me. Do you understand now? The voice was low, smooth, like velvet, but it was filled with a hunger that made my skin crawl. It was the voice from my dreams, the one that had called me, beckoned me into this nightmare. The one that had whispered promises of something more. I couldn't answer. The words caught in my throat, choked by fear and disbelief. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing. What was this thing? What did it want? It is too late, the voice continued, its tone almost pitying. You have already opened the door. There is no turning back now. I tried to speak, to protest, but my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, as if something were keeping me from forming words. I could only stare at the figure, my mind a blur of confusion and terror. Do you feel it? The voice asked again, its coldness seeping into my bones. The weight of what you've unleashed? The heart that lies within you now, beating for us? The darkness in the room seemed to press closer, swirling around me like a storm. The figure stepped forward, its form rippling as if made from shadow itself, its edges shifting and warping in the dim light. You cannot escape it, the voice whispered, now filling the space around me, as though it was inside my very thoughts. You never could. With a sudden, violent jolt, the figure lunged toward me, its long, dark limbs reaching out, its face still hidden behind the veil of darkness. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I tried to scramble away, but my body wouldn't respond. Just as it was about to touch me, the room seemed to tilt, the floor beneath me disappearing. I felt myself falling, tumbling into the blackness, as if the world itself had opened up beneath me. The figure's voice echoed in my ears, growing louder, more insistent. Your heart belongs to us, it said. And now, we will take it. I felt a jolt of pain shoot through my chest, like something was pulling at the very core of my being. I gasped, my vision blurring, the edges of the world flickering in and out of focus. But then, as quickly as it had come, the pain stopped. The darkness receded, and I was left suspended in an abyss, hanging between worlds, unable to move, unable to speak. And then, something changed. A voice, soft and familiar, cut through the silence. A whisper, almost drowned out by the chaos around me, but I could hear it clearly, like a distant memory. Don't give up. It's not too late. I tried to focus on the voice, to understand who was speaking, but the shadows began to pull at me again, threatening to drag me back into the abyss. No. I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't fight anymore. But the voice persisted, growing stronger, more insistent. You have the strength. It's inside you. You just have to remember. The world around me began to solidify once more, and I felt my feet hit the ground. I was no longer in the abyss. I was back in the room, surrounded by the same darkness, but now it felt different. Less suffocating. Like there was a way out. I didn't know how, but I could feel the presence of something ancient, something dark, just beyond the threshold. And it was waiting for me to make my choice. There was still time. Still a chance. But I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself. The voice had given me a reason to fight, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. But would it be enough? I opened my eyes, and the shadows began to swirl again. I had to move fast. The darkness that surrounded me was no longer a vague, oppressive weight. It had become alive, tangible, suffocating. It thrummed with malevolent energy, pressing against my skin, crawling under my flesh. But something had changed. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I could feel the spark of resistance growing inside me, a flicker of defiance against the encroaching nightmare. Remember, the voice whispered again, soft as a breeze, yet cutting through the chaos like a blade. Remember who you are. I closed my eyes, trying to summon some shred of clarity amidst the swirling shadows. The book. The rats. The creature. It all led back to that cursed object, the thing that had opened the door to this hellish world. It was a key, an ancient key, and it had unlocked more than just the horrors of the underground tunnels. It had unlocked something inside me, too. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for my very soul. The figure loomed in front of me again, its form shifting and stretching like liquid darkness, its eyes glowing like twin pools of molten silver. I could feel its presence filling the room, filling the very air I breathed. You cannot escape, it hissed, its voice like the scrape of claws on stone. You belong to us now. I forced myself to stand, my body trembling, my chest tight. The weight of fear pressed down on me, but I refused to let it consume me. The voice had told me there was still time. The strength was inside me. I didn't know how, but I could feel it stirring, deep in my bones. I am not yours, I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. But as I said them, something inside me shifted. The words became more than just defiance, they became a weapon. The darkness recoiled for the briefest moment, as though the force of my resistance had struck it. The figure snarled, its form contorting in agony. You dare defy us? It snarled. You cannot resist what is inevitable. I didn't listen. I couldn't. The shadows were pushing me, clawing at my mind, but I fought back with everything I had. I reached deep inside myself, into the place where the fear had taken root, and I grabbed hold of it. I twisted it, bent it to my will. The power that had been awakened by the book, it was mine to command now. The air around me shimmered, as though the very fabric of reality was warping. The figure howled in fury, but I could feel it weakening. The darkness was no longer impenetrable. It was bending, shifting, losing its hold. "Leave me!" I shouted, my voice rising, filled with an anger I hadn't known I was capable of. "You will not take me." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the darkness recoiled, as if struck by an unseen force. The figure shuddered, its form rippling, losing its shape, as though it could no longer hold itself together. It writhed, and in that moment, I saw something terrifying, its face. It was the face of a man, but twisted, grotesque, covered in dark veins that pulsed like something alive. The eyes were the same molten silver, but they were hollow, empty, as though they had been drained of life. The mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, and I could see the jagged, broken teeth behind it. "You cannot kill what is already dead," the thing whispered, its voice now a rasping whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "We are eternal." But the power inside me had already begun to grow, stronger with every breath I took. The book had been a key, but now it was a weapon. I could feel its energy coursing through me, burning away the fear, replacing it with something else, something much stronger. I took a step forward, my gaze fixed on the creature before me. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing against me, but I no longer felt trapped. The darkness no longer had control. "You are nothing," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "You are nothing but a shadow, and I will destroy you." With that, I raised my hand, and a surge of energy erupted from within me. The shadows screamed in agony, their form breaking apart like brittle glass. The figure howled, its body crumbling, disintegrating into nothingness. I felt the energy surge within me, as though the very essence of the book was flowing through my veins. The shadows burned, vanishing into the air like smoke in the wind, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. The room was still. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of fear, it was the silence of victory. The shadows had been defeated. The curse was broken. But as I stood there, panting, my body shaking with the aftermath of the battle, I felt something else stir within me. The power, the strength, the knowledge that had come from the book, it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to reclaim me. I closed my eyes, trying to banish it, but I knew, deep down, that it was too late. The darkness had left its mark. It would never truly leave me. I had one, yes, but at what cost? The book had been a key, a weapon, a doorway. And now, it had taken something from me in return. My heart, perhaps. My soul. But I had survived. That was all that mattered. For now. And so, as I stepped away from the wreckage of the shadows, the last thing I heard was the faintest whisper in the dark. "Your heart is ours." And I knew, then, that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Whispers in the forest. The storm had passed. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stood at the edge of the forest, staring at the twisted trees that loomed like skeletal sentinels in the fading light. The wind had calmed, but there was something unsettling about the air now, heavy, thick with the promise of something unseen, something ancient. It was supposed to be a simple trip. A weekend getaway to the cabin I had rented, tucked away in the woods of the southwestern United States. The kind of place you'd find on a postcard, silent, peaceful, and isolated. I was looking for a break from the noise of the city, a few days to reconnect with nature and clear my mind. But even as the rain began to ease, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The forest felt different. There was a sharpness to it, a tension in the air that I couldn't explain. At first, I dismissed it as just nerves. Being alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of nature, can make anyone feel a little on edge. As night fell, I made my way inside, trying to push the unease out of my mind. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows, but it wasn't the wind that unsettled me. No, it was the whispers. Low, soft murmurs that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards, like someone or something was just out of sight. I froze, standing still in the middle of the room. The house was empty. It was just me. Probably the house settling, I muttered to myself, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. I turned on the TV, hoping to drown out the strange noise, but it only made things worse. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I could swear they were calling my name. At first, I thought I was imagining it, maybe exhaustion or too much time alone. But as I listened closer, the whispers grew clearer. They weren't random. They were words. My name, Catherine. My heart skipped a beat. I whipped around, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room behind me was still, the shadows long in the corners, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet the sound of my name lingered in the air, like a memory that refused to fade. I stepped forward, cautiously, toward the source of the sound. The whispers came from beneath the floorboards, that much was clear now. I knelt down, my fingers brushing the wooden planks, feeling a strange vibration in the air, as though something was moving just beneath the surface. But there was no way to explain it. No pipes, no hidden speakers, just the old, withered wood of the cabin. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. Complete silence. A shiver ran down my spine. I stood up slowly, looking around the room, but there was nothing but the oppressive quiet. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, lost in the eerie stillness, but when I finally moved, it was as though the cabin itself exhaled a breath I didn't know it was holding. I stepped away from the floor, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. It was just the storm, just my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself again. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The storm had passed, yes, but the night was just beginning. The forest outside had taken on a new life, and it was watching me. And then, I heard it again. A soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. Slowly, relentlessly. From beneath the floorboards. This time, I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest, listening. The sound stopped. Then, after a long, suffocating pause, a voice, clearer now, like it was speaking directly into my ear, whispered, "Leave, now." I didn't need any more warnings. The fear that had been creeping into my bones suddenly exploded into full-blown terror. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't my imagination. Something was here. Something that had been waiting for the storm to pass. And now, it was aware of me. I stumbled backward, my mind spinning, desperately trying to form a plan, but there was no plan. The door was locked. The windows, locked too. I was trapped, and whatever was in this place, whatever had been whispering to me, wasn't going to let me leave. The forest outside was alive with sound now, the wind whipping through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, and, just barely above the rest, something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, scratching, scuttling, like something moving beneath the earth, just beyond my reach. Something watching, something waiting, and it was drawing closer. As I stood there, listening to the whispers rising again, the floorboards groaning beneath their weight, I realized one terrible truth. It wasn't just the storm that had passed. It was the silence. The silence stretched, suffocating, thickening the air around me. My breath felt shallow as I pressed my back against the cabin's wall, trying to steady my pulse. The whispers were gone now, replaced by the unsettling sounds of something moving under the house. The faint scratching had transformed into something heavier, more deliberate, as if whatever was down there was testing the foundation, pressing against the walls, probing for a way in. "Focus," I whispered to myself, forcing my eyes to stay fixed on the door. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you." But I could no longer convince myself. The house wasn't just creaking, it was alive, and whatever it wasn't just a storm or my imagination. I moved toward the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my weight as I tried to steady myself, looking for anything that could explain the sounds. Perhaps a loose pipe, a rodent, an animal that had taken refuge under the cabin. My mind grasped at straws, desperate to cling to logic, to something I could control. But as I opened the cabinet to search for a flashlight, I froze. There, on the floor, just in front of the cabinets, were small, sharp claw marks. Deep, ragged scratches, etched into the wood like they had been made by something with massive, gnashing claws. The marks didn't make sense. No animal could leave such a trail, not in this precise, deliberate pattern. I swallowed hard. My eyes darted back to the door, then to the windows, trying to think, trying to find a way out. But the fear in my chest began to settle into something worse. A realization. I wasn't alone in this cabin. And whatever was under it, whatever had made those scratches, was coming for me. The wind outside howled again, rattling the windows. The cabin trembled with the force of it, but this time I didn't feel comforted. The wind felt like a warning, like it was just one part of something bigger, a force that was drawing in, tightening its grip on the land. A sharp thud echoed from beneath the floor. It was louder this time, more forceful, as if something had struck the earth itself. I took a step backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then, without thinking, I ran to the window and shoved it open, my hands trembling as I worked the frame. The air outside felt colder than I expected, like the chill from the forest had seeped into the house itself. I leaned out, looking into the dark woods beyond the cabin. The trees stood still, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. But in the distance, near the tree line, something moved. A shadow. I blinked, trying to focus, but the shape disappeared behind the thick trunks of the trees. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus, to push past the growing panic. It was nothing. Just my mind. The wind. The storm had made the world outside seem darker, more twisted. But then I heard it again. The whisper. Closer this time, louder, more distinct. "Come, come." My breath caught in my throat. I knew the voice, though I had never heard it before. It was calling me. But there was something so wrong about it, something twisted that gnawed at my mind. It was the voice of someone wanting me to listen, no, demanding that I listen. I pulled my head back inside, slamming the window shut. My heart was in my throat now, my body frozen in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to run, but my legs felt like lead, too heavy to move. That was when I heard the first scream. It came from beneath the floor. A guttural, horrifying sound, a desperate cry that tore through the silence like a jagged knife. It wasn't human. It wasn't even an animal. It was a sound I couldn't understand, but one that seemed to speak directly to my soul. The ground beneath my feet vibrated as if something huge, something powerful, was moving below me. The house groaned under its weight, the walls shaking with the force of it. And then, in a flash of terrifying clarity, I understood. Whatever was beneath this cabin, whatever had been whispering to me, it wasn't trying to reach me through the floor. No. It was using the house. Using the very ground to get closer. I turned toward the door, my chest tightening as I realized there was nowhere to go. The forest, the open air, it was all part of it now. Whatever was hunting me, it had already claimed this place. It was already here, inside the house with me, and it wasn't just whispering anymore. It was speaking. The voice came again, clearer this time, ringing through my skull like an iron bell. Come, find me. I stumbled backward, my breath shallow and erratic. I had to get out. I had to run. But the door. I turned and bolted for it, my hand fumbling for the handle. As I grabbed it and pulled with all my strength, I realized in horror that the door was locked. No. No, no, no. The door shuddered, as if it too was alive, resisting my frantic attempts to escape. The floor beneath me trembled again, the sound of something scraping the earth beneath the cabin growing louder, more desperate. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, whatever was beneath me, closing in. It was coming. And this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a promise. The door was still locked. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath ragged as I pulled on the handle again, harder this time. But it didn't budge. My mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I was missing. The walls seemed to close in, the very air thick with the sounds of movement beneath me. Then I heard it. A soft scraping sound just beneath the door. A sound like claws dragging across the wood. My mind reeled, trying to rationalize it, to push the thought of what it could mean out of my head. But there was no denying it. It was as if something huge was tunneling its way closer, right beneath the floorboards. I had never been one for irrational fear, but this was different. The terror I felt now was visceral, something deeper than any storm, any noise. I backed away slowly, my hand trembling as it brushed against the wall, seeking anything that could offer comfort, a weapon, a means of escape. My thoughts were a whirlwind, each more frantic than the last. But then came the sound I had been dreading. A sudden thud. It was right below me. The floor shuddered again, the sound deep and unnatural, like something enormous was shifting beneath the cabin's foundation. The silence that followed was suffocating. I held my breath, waiting for it to return. I could almost feel it, the presence. It was right there, just under the house, moving in slow, deliberate movements, as if it was toying with me. Then, a loud cracking noise pierced the air. The floor in front of me splintered open with a violent pop, sending wooden shards flying. I stumbled back, nearly falling, my heart nearly stopping as a massive clawed hand reached through the opening. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The hand, no, the thing, was grotesque, covered in matted fur and dripping with something dark and viscous. It was too large, too monstrous to comprehend. Each claw was the size of a small tree branch, sharp and menacing. The skin of its arm was scarred, as if it had been scraping against the walls of the earth for years, trying to claw its way out. I barely had time to react before it dragged itself through the hole, the ground trembling beneath its weight. A second hand followed, then a leg, thick and scaled, breaking through the floorboards with an explosive crack. It was like watching a nightmare take shape, the very cabin I had thought was safe being torn apart by the sheer force of this thing. I backed into the corner, my breath shallow, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs were frozen. I could see the thing now, its glowing, yellow eyes gleamed in the dim light, fixated on me with a hunger that felt ancient, primal. It was no longer hiding in the shadows, it was here. The whispers from beneath the earth had become real, solidified into a grotesque, living nightmare. And it was coming for me. I heard a sickening growl, low and guttural, from deep in its chest. The ground beneath my feet cracked open again, and I stumbled backward, instinctively raising my hands in front of me as if I could protect myself from the inevitable. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt useless, pathetic in the face of the terror before me. It didn't respond. Of course, it didn't. It was a creature from the dark, from the very earth itself, a thing that had been waiting for so long, biding its time until it found a way out. I needed to think. I needed to act. The door was still locked. I could hear the thing's claws scraping against the floor, its breathing coming in heavy, ragged gasps. Its presence filled every inch of the room, its size overwhelming, suffocating. And then, just as it was about to fully emerge from the hole it had torn through, I remembered the attic. It was a crawl space above the kitchen, small, cramped, but it was one of the only places in the house that hadn't been affected by the creature's movements. If I could reach it, if I could hide. I didn't give myself time to second guess. I turned and bolted for the trapdoor at the back of the room, my heart thundering in my chest. Every step felt like an eternity. Behind me, I could hear the creature's breathing grow louder, feel the tremors of its movements as it advanced. Just as I reached the trapdoor, I heard it, a loud crack, followed by a deep growl that rattled my bones. The creature was closer than I thought. Its claws scraped against the walls, dragging the earth and wood with it. I yanked the trapdoor open, and without thinking, I climbed inside. The attic was dark. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. I stumbled into the space, pulling the trapdoor shut behind me just as the floor below me groaned again. I could hear it, its claws, scraping against the walls, getting closer, as though it was searching for me, as though it knew where I was. I crawled deeper into the attic, my hands shaking as I fumbled through the darkness. My mind screamed at me to stay quiet, to stay still, but the urge to run was almost unbearable. And then, I heard the sound again, the whisper, now louder than ever, clearer, as if it was in my ear. "Found you." I froze. The voice wasn't just coming from beneath the floor. It was all around me. And that was when I understood, the thing hadn't just been under the cabin. It had been inside me all along. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to control the panic rising in my chest. The attic was suffocating, the air thick with dust and the weight of whatever nightmare I had found myself trapped in. The whispers echoed around me now, louder and more distinct, their cadence sharp and rhythmic, as if they were surrounding me, closing in. "Found you." The voice was unmistakable, an ancient, rasping sound that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was something deeper, something woven into the very walls of this house. The sound came from all directions, reverberating in the dark corners of the attic, making my skin crawl with each syllable. I pressed myself into the corner, trying to make myself as small as possible, but no matter how still I was, I could feel its presence, feel it moving, stalking me from every corner of this suffocating space. The thing had found me. I wasn't just a victim of the creature below, of the shadows that haunted this place. I was part of it. I closed my eyes, squeezing my eyelids shut, trying to block out the noises, but they only grew louder. The whispering, the scraping, the feeling of being watched, of something waiting. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing with me, feeding off my terror. I could hear its claws once again, a rhythmic scratching against the floor below. But this time, the sound was different. There was a wetness to it, a deeper resonance. My pulse quickened as I felt a cold chill slither down my spine. It wasn't just beneath the floorboards anymore, it was inside, creeping through the cracks in the walls, the floors, the very foundation of the house. I could almost taste it on the air, thick and metallic. My thoughts spiraled into a haze. The whispers, the creature, they were all part of something far worse than I had ever imagined. The thing beneath the house, the giant rodent-like creature with its glowing eyes and massive claws, it wasn't just hunting me. It was trying to take me. But not just in a physical sense. It was trying to consume me, to drag me into the darkness of the earth, into its world. The attic felt smaller with each passing second, the darkness pressing in on me, suffocating me. I could hear its breath now, low and ragged, coming from somewhere just below the floorboards. It was closer. Too close. Think. I urged myself. My mind raced for some kind of escape, some way out. But I knew there was no escape from this place. The whispers, the thing beneath the house, they were all part of something much larger than I could comprehend. A trap. A snare woven from the deepest, darkest corners of the earth. I stood up, my legs shaking, but I couldn't make myself move forward. I glanced around the attic in a desperate search for something, anything, that might offer protection. But there was nothing. Only rotting wood and old, forgotten belongings. Dust-covered boxes and broken furniture, their shadows stretching long in the dim light. I needed to get out. I needed to leave this place before it consumed me completely. But then, the trapdoor creaked. The sound echoed in the stillness of the attic like a thunderclap, jolting me into action. I turned towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. The thing below, the creature, it was coming. My legs carried me before I could think, scrambling toward the trapdoor, but it was too late. The attic door was already opening, slowly, methodically, as if it were being pulled by invisible hands. I could hear its claws scraping against the wood, the unmistakable sound of something massive pulling itself through the gap. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I reached for the door, pulling at the handle, but it refused to budge. My breath came in frantic gasps as I pulled harder, tears beginning to blur my vision. The whispers were louder now, the scraping of claws becoming more urgent, closer. Something was coming up from below. Something that was waiting. In that moment, I understood. The creature, the whispers, the darkness, it had been drawing me in, piece by piece, each step taking me further into its trap. I had thought I could escape, thought I could fight it off, but the house, this place, it had been waiting for someone like me. Someone who would hear the whispers, someone who would fall into its grasp. And now, I was nothing more than prey. The attic door opened fully with a sickening creak, and I froze, unable to move. The thing was there, its massive, glowing eyes staring into mine, its breath hot and rancid in the cold air. But then, in the split second before it lunged, the floor beneath me cracked once more. The trapdoor ripped open completely, and the thing from beneath, the massive creature with the gleaming eyes, pulled itself fully into the attic. Its claws slashed out at me, and I could feel the air shift as its massive form loomed over me. But I was no longer there. The world spun around me as I fell into the darkness below, swallowed by the very earth. I didn't land in the cold, dry earth I expected. Instead, I was surrounded by warmth. A pulsating, nauseating heat that filled my lungs, making it hard to breathe. My body ached. My head throbbed. I couldn't focus, couldn't see. My hands grasped at something soft, fleshy, and I screamed, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by the thick, suffocating air. I opened my eyes, but all I could see were shadows. The whispers were louder now, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. The thing wasn't just under the house. It had followed me. It had taken me here. I felt the grip tighten around me, like something pulling me deeper, dragging me into a place where no one could escape. The shadows shifted, taking form. And I realized with a sickening jolt that the whispers, the creature, they had already won. It was too late. There was no escape. The darkness consumed me. And that was the end. Whispering at the lake. The air was thick with a quiet unease, one that crept through the trees and settled deep in my bones. I had come to the lake, a small body of water nestled deep in the woods of eastern America, for a weekend getaway. It was meant to be a peaceful escape, something to clear my head, away from the bustling noise of the city. But the lake had a way of making you feel unwelcome. I had heard the rumors before I arrived, the whispers of strange occurrences from the locals. The water, they said, was not like any other water. It changed colors, sometimes shifting from a deep, dark blue to a murky, almost toxic green. But it wasn't just the water's hue that made people wary. At night, the surface of the lake seemed to move as though something, or someone, was beneath it. There was talk of a woman who had drowned there many years ago, her body never found, her spirit left to wander. That night, I couldn't sleep. The stillness of the forest outside my cabin was unsettling. I lay in bed listening to the odd sounds of the trees, the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. But there was something else, something more unnerving, whispers. Soft, barely audible voices that seemed to come from the direction of the lake. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispers became clearer, more distinct. They sounded like a woman's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. I pulled the covers tightly around me, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the whispers continued. And then, there was movement on the surface of the lake, gentle ripples at first, like the water was disturbed by an unseen force. I stared out the window, my heart racing, my mind struggling to explain what I was seeing. I had heard about the lake's strange properties, but I hadn't expected to experience it firsthand. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were calling my name, drawing me in. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside, but curiosity, mixed with a strange compulsion, pushed me to the door. I stepped outside, the cool night air biting at my skin. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the lake. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, and the whispers had stopped. But something was wrong. I could feel it. As I walked closer to the water's edge, I saw movement again. This time, it was more than just ripples. The surface of the lake seemed to break apart, as though something was rising from below. The air grew colder, and I could swear I saw a shadow move beneath the water, dark and formless, shifting like a figure. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I froze, unable to move. And then I heard it again, whispers, but this time, they were not just in my head. The voice was coming from the lake, a soft, melodic whisper that beckoned me closer. It was as if the water itself was alive, calling to me, promising something I couldn't understand. The closer I got, the more the whispers intensified, like a crescendo of voices wrapped in sorrow and longing. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest, but it was too late. The water seemed to reach out to me, the figure beneath it rising further. It was a woman, her features indistinct, her body pale and twisted. She floated above the water, her long, dark hair trailing like tendrils in the current. Her eyes were empty, black voids that seemed to pull at my soul. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, but the whispers followed me. The woman's voice was clearer now, and though I couldn't understand the words, I knew they were meant for me. She was asking for something. No. Demanding something. I turned and ran, my breath ragged, my legs heavy as I pushed myself through the underbrush. But no matter how fast I ran, the whispers followed. They grew louder, closer, until they felt like they were in my ears, in my mind. I couldn't escape. The lake, the woman, they had me now. When I finally reached the cabin, I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. My hands were trembling, my heart racing in terror. I stumbled over to the window, desperate to see if the lake was still there. But all I saw was the darkness, an empty void. I was safe, for now. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were inside my head now, and I knew, deep down, that they would never leave me. The woman from the lake had marked me, and she would be with me always. The night dragged on in a suffocating silence, the kind that presses in on you from all sides, making even the smallest sound seem deafening. I tried to sleep, tried to shut out the dread gnawing at my mind, but the whispers were relentless, an incessant hum beneath everything I did. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in circles, trying to understand what had just happened. What was that thing? The woman? A ghost? A spirit? I forced myself to sit up, trying to calm my breathing. The cabin felt like a prison now. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer, as though they were waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. I had to leave. I had to get away from the lake, from whatever it was that had called to me. I couldn't explain it, but deep down I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. But the question burned in my mind, could I leave? I pulled on my jacket and grabbed my bag, determined to get out of the cabin and drive back to the nearest town. The whispers grew fainter as I gathered my things, but they never quite disappeared. They lingered, echoing in my mind as I stepped outside once more, the cold air biting into my skin like a warning. I glanced toward the lake, and my stomach churned. The water was still. Too still. The shadows beneath its surface felt more alive now, like they were watching me, waiting for me to approach. My instinct screamed at me to turn away, but I couldn't help it. I felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath catching in my throat. The whispers were back, louder now, surrounding me. It was as if the very air had changed, thickened, pressed in on me. I turned around, hoping to find some sign of safety, my car, the road, anything that could pull me away from this nightmare. But there was nothing. The woods around me had changed. The trees, once familiar, now seemed twisted, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The path I had walked just hours ago had vanished, swallowed by the thickening fog that seemed to rise from the lake itself. Panic flared in my chest as I turned in circles, trying to make sense of the impossible. I couldn't hear anything now, no birds, no rustling of the trees, only the rush of blood in my ears and the steady pounding of my heart. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The whispers had stopped, but that only made the silence worse. Then, the water moved again. It wasn't a ripple this time, it was a violent surge, the surface breaking apart as though something immense was pushing up from below. The woman, no, the thing, rose from the depths of the lake once again. Her figure twisted and distorted in the moonlight, a writhing mass of pale limbs and flowing hair. Her face, it wasn't a face anymore. It was a void, a black emptiness that seemed to consume everything around it. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground as if the lake had sent something invisible to hold me in place. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My mouth was dry, my limbs frozen, and all I could do was watch as the thing rose higher, its form growing larger, more monstrous with every passing second. And then it spoke. Not with words, but with a feeling, a sensation that exploded in my mind. The thing wanted me. No, it needed me. In that moment, I understood. The whispers, the presence, the coldness, everything was leading to this. The lake had been waiting for me, waiting for someone to answer its call. And now, it had found me. It wasn't just a spirit, a ghost, it was an entity, a force that had existed for far longer than I could comprehend, and it would not let me go. I stumbled backward, tearing my gaze away from the thing rising from the water. My body was moving on instinct now, but the fog seemed to press in from all sides, disorienting me, pulling me further into the woods. I couldn't see anything clearly. The path had completely vanished, replaced by the dark, oppressive trees that closed in around me like they were alive, hungry. The whispers came back, louder now, as though they were inside my head, and I realized with growing horror that I wasn't running from the thing. I was running toward it, toward the lake, toward the water, toward the darkness that had claimed so many before me. And then the ground gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling through the darkness, my body slamming against rocks and tree roots, my mind reeling with the terrible knowledge that there was no escape. The whispers crescendoed, filling my ears, my mind, until it felt as though my skull would crack open from the pressure. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the water, dark, empty, and waiting. When I awoke, it wasn't the comfort of the cabin that greeted me, but the cold, damp earth beneath my back. My body ached, each movement sending a jolt of pain through my limbs. I tried to sit up, but the dizziness was overwhelming. The air smelled of decay and wet stone, like a tomb. I could hear nothing but the sound of my ragged breaths and the distant murmur of water. At first, I thought it was the lake, but then I realized the noise was much closer than I had expected. The water, it was rushing, as if something had disturbed its stillness. I wiped my face, groggy, confused. My hand came away sticky with something warm. Blood. My head throbbed from the fall, but the fear still clawed at me. Something was wrong. I shouldn't be here. I forced myself to my feet, swaying dangerously, and took in my surroundings. I was no longer at the lake's edge. The woods had swallowed me whole, and I could see nothing but shadows twisting in the thick fog. The trees loomed over me like silent sentinels, watching, waiting. I took a tentative step forward, then another, trying to steady myself. But the ground felt uneven, like the earth itself was shifting beneath me. I reached out to steady myself on a nearby tree, but as my fingers brushed against its bark, I recoiled in shock. It was wet, slimy, and when I looked closer, I saw it wasn't just water. There were trails of something darker, something viscous running down the trunk as though the tree itself was weeping. A wave of nausea hit me, and I staggered back, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw it, a shape moving in the fog. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But then, the shape became clearer. A figure. A woman, or at least, it used to be a woman. Her hair hung in wet, matted strands around her face, her body twisted in unnatural angles. She moved with the grace of something not quite human, her arms stretching out impossibly, far as if reaching for me. Her eyes, hollow and black, locked onto mine, and in that moment, I knew she was the thing from the lake. The whispers came again, a low hum at the edges of my mind, but now it wasn't just in my head. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it. I could feel her voice, her thoughts, pressing in, suffocating me. She was calling me, beckoning me toward the lake, toward the place where it had all begun. I took another step back, the ground giving way beneath me again. This time, I didn't fall, but the sensation of falling was still there, deep within me, pulling at my very soul. The woman, no, the thing, was getting closer, moving faster, her broken body twitching unnaturally as she glided toward me. My legs refused to move. I was frozen, paralyzed with terror, and the whispers grew louder, sharper, until they became voices, no longer whispers, but words, real words, calling my name. I shut my eyes, squeezing them tight, trying to block out the sounds, but it didn't work. The voices were inside me now, each one a blade digging deeper into my mind. The lake had claimed me. There was no escape. I opened my eyes, and the thing was gone. The fog had thickened, swallowing her whole. But I knew she was still there, somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, the ground shifted again. But this time, I didn't fall. I was being pulled, dragged by something invisible, something far stronger than anything I had ever encountered. My feet were no longer on solid ground. I was sinking into the earth itself. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My hands scraped at the ground, at the roots, at the stones, but they only seemed to slip further away as I was dragged deeper into the darkness. I could feel the cold of the water again, surrounding me, closing in. The lake was pulling me back. I was drowning in the whispers, in the cold, in the thing that had once been human, now nothing more than a shadow, an entity that could never be escaped. And then, all at once, it stopped. The pull, the suffocating pressure, the whispers, they were gone. I was floating in an endless void, weightless, and I could see nothing. Only darkness. Only the sound of my own breathing. And in that silence, I understood. There was no escaping the lake. Not in life. Not in death. The thing had claimed me, and there was no going back. I don't know how long I was there, lost in the dark, suspended in the space between life and death. Time didn't seem to exist anymore. The only thing I could feel was the cold. The same cold that had surrounded me when I first felt the pull, when I first realized I was no longer on solid ground. Then, a flicker of light. It appeared so faint at first, I thought I was imagining it. But it grew stronger, more intense. A shape emerged from the void, something familiar, something wrong, the silhouette of the lake. The mist hovered above the water, its surface shimmering in a way that made my heart race. But it wasn't the peaceful lake I had once known. This lake was alive. Alive with something dark and ancient. The woman, or whatever she had become, stood by the edge, her face turned toward me. Her eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, burned through the distance, and the void around me began to collapse, as though the lake itself was pulling me back. My body moved against my will, my legs carrying me toward her, each step heavier than the last. The ground beneath me was no longer solid, no longer earth, but water. Cold, black water, pulling at me, trying to swallow me whole. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fought to keep from sinking, but I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't escape. The woman's form seemed to stretch and shift as I drew closer, her body distorting like a reflection in broken glass. Her fingers reached out, elongated and twisted, beckoning me into the depths. Come closer, her voice echoed in my mind, the whispers now unmistakable words, cold and commanding. It is time to join us. I tried to scream, to beg, to fight against the invisible pull, but my throat was dry, my voice lost in the chaos of the darkness. The water was up to my waist now, swirling around my legs, pulling me under. My feet slipped, and for a moment, I thought I might drown in the inky blackness, consumed by the lake, consumed by her. But then, in the distance, a sound, faint, but clear. A voice. A man's voice, calling my name. It was his voice. Tom's voice. I fought against the pull, the cold water now rising to my chest, my arms heavy, like lead. I could still hear him, faintly. My mind grasped at the sound, reaching for it, desperate for something real, something human. But as I moved toward the voice, it began to fade, and I felt the woman's cold fingers brush against my skin. No, I thought, my heart racing. It's not real. It's not him. She's lying. But it didn't matter. The water closed over my head, pulling me down into the depths. The woman's shadow hovered above me, her eyes the last thing I saw before everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the lake. The cold was gone. The darkness was gone. I was lying on something soft. The faintest light filtered through the edges of the room I was in. But it didn't feel like reality. It felt wrong. Like I was floating in a dream, trapped in some twisted version of it. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest as I took in the strange surroundings. The walls were covered in damp, decaying wood, and the floor beneath me was covered in a thick layer of dust. I felt a presence in the room, and my head snapped to the side, my eyes widening. There she was. The woman from the lake. She was standing by the door, watching me with those hollow eyes, her lips curled in a twisted grin. She was no longer a shadow, no longer a figment of my imagination. She was real. She was here. And I realized, in that moment, that there was no escape. She had already claimed me. She had already won. The room grew colder, the air thick with her presence. I could feel the weight of her gaze pressing down on me. My body trembled, my mind screaming for release, but I was trapped, caught in a world between life and death, a world where I could never truly escape her. And as she stepped closer, her fingers reaching for me once more, I knew the truth. I would never leave this place. I was already hers. Forever. Family curse. It started when I was a child. The whispers. At night, in the dark, when everyone else was asleep, I could hear them, voices, faint and distant, coming from the corners of the house. My parents would dismiss it, telling me it was just the wind or the house settling. But I knew better. The sounds weren't natural. They were too deliberate, too human. I grew up in the northern part of the United States, in a small, secluded house nestled between thick woods. My family had lived there for generations, in the same old house, with the same strange occurrences. It was just part of life, part of the legacy passed down through the years. A legacy I never understood until it was almost too late. My great-grandfather had been the first to show signs of it, the madness. It started with small things, forgetfulness, irritability, long stretches of silence where he just stared into the dark. The doctors couldn't explain it, and neither could the rest of the family. They called it something benign, but we all knew what it was. Something was breaking him, piece by piece. Then it was my grandfather. He was different from his father, though. He wasn't forgetful. No, he was worse. He started speaking to someone in the middle of the night. And not just speaking, arguing, laughing, sometimes crying. My grandmother said she could hear him talking to himself, but it wasn't really him. It was someone else, someone who wasn't there. The whispers had become louder, more persistent, until he became completely unhinged. The house feels different now. I can't explain it. It's like the air is thicker, the walls closer, pressing on me as if they know. They know what's coming, and they're waiting. I can feel it every time I step into a room, like there's something behind me, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The whispers grow louder each night. At first, they were just faint murmurs in the back of my mind, like I could almost catch the words, but they slipped away as soon as I tried to focus. But now, they're clearer, distinct, and they're calling my name. Every night, the same thing. They come closer and closer until I can almost feel the breath on my neck. I've tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it's just my mind playing tricks, that the stress of the past few years is finally catching up with me. But it's hard to deny the truth when the walls themselves seem to shift, when the lights flicker and dim, casting long shadows that curl and twist into shapes that shouldn't exist. The worst part? It's happening to my mother too. She says she hears it too, the voices, the footsteps in the hallway at night. She doesn't talk about it much, but I see the way her eyes dart around the house now, the way she hurries past certain rooms as if afraid to look inside. I wonder if she sees the same thing I do, the strange, unnatural shadows that linger at the corners of my vision. I had to face it. I couldn't run any longer. I decided to go to the attic. That's where the worst of it started, where it all began for my great-grandfather. The attic was always a place of mystery and fear. I remember my parents telling me to stay out of it when I was younger. It's not safe up there, they'd say, their voices sharp and fearful. Don't go near it. But now, it's different. Now I have no choice. I know the answers are up there, hidden in the dust and old boxes that have sat untouched for years. I don't know what I'll find, but I have to know. The curse is not just in my family, it's in this house. It's in the very walls, the foundation, the attic where the first whispers started. And it's been waiting for me. I grabbed the flashlight, the beam trembling in my hand as I made my way up the narrow staircase. The wooden steps creaked beneath me, the sound sharp in the stillness of the house. I paused at the top, shining the light around. The attic was just as I remembered, cold, damp, and filled with the scent of mildew. The air felt heavy, like it had been holding secrets for far too long. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made my heart skip. I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat, but the door was closed. No wind, no draft, just the unnatural quiet of the room. I began to sift through the old boxes, my mind racing. My great-grandfather's journals were here, I was certain of it. And then there were the photographs, old, yellowed, brittle with age. As I picked them up, a chill ran down my spine. In every photo, there were figures standing just outside the frame, their faces obscured, but their eyes glowed. A soft noise broke through the silence. A skittering, like something moving quickly across the floor. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, a shadow darting just out of sight. My heart raced, my hands shaking as I tried to steady the light. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. No answer. But the sound came again, this time louder, closer. I backed up slowly, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was it? What was in the attic with me? And then, I heard it, a voice. It wasn't the whispering from before, but something worse. A low, guttural growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of teeth scraping together. I turned the flashlight toward the noise, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the shadows, was a figure. A silhouette, distorted, too tall to be human, with eyes that gleamed in the darkness. It moved toward me, slowly, deliberately, each step echoing in the attic like thunder. The curse had found me. And now it's my father. My father, who has been in and out of psychiatric care for years, claiming that someone is calling him in the dark, beckoning him to follow them into the woods. He's become a hollow version of the man I once knew. It's hard to look at him now, but the worst part is that I know it's coming for me next. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to rationalize it away, but as I sit in the same room where my father once sat, I feel it, the chill creeping up my spine. The same chill that has haunted every member of my family, generation after generation. The whispers have started again. Just a faint murmur at first, like a breeze moving through the cracks in the walls. But it's growing louder now, and I can hear words in it, words that I recognize. My own name, the names of my siblings, my mother. And then, just when I think I can take no more, I hear a new voice. A voice that doesn't belong. It's calm, soothing, yet there's something wrong with it. Something dark. I don't know who it is. I don't know what they want. But it doesn't matter, because I can already feel it, the pull. It's not just the whispers anymore. It's the weight of something pressing in from all sides, suffocating me, dragging me deeper into the darkness. I don't want to go. I don't want to follow. But it's happening again. The curse is moving through me, just as it moved through my ancestors. Slowly, surely, until I too will lose myself. And then, I will speak to the things in the dark. The creature's eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger, burning through the darkness, its form unnatural and shifting, as though it was made of shadows rather than flesh. The growl deepened, vibrating in my chest, and a sickening realization clawed at my mind. This was not a person. It wasn't even a creature from this world. It was the thing that had haunted my family for generations, the thing that had been waiting for me to uncover the truth. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the shadowy figure that stalked closer with every breath. The light flickered again, and for a moment, the creature seemed to distort, its shape bending and warping like smoke in the wind. I knew I had to move, to run, but the fear kept me rooted to the spot, as though the very air in the attic was keeping me there. The creature's growl became louder, and then it stopped. Silence fell over the room, a heavy, suffocating silence that made my skin crawl. The only sound now was my shallow, panicked breathing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to reason with myself. This can't be real. It's just a trick. The stress, the isolation. It's all in my head. But I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. My great-grandfather had warned about it in his journals, the warnings about the curse, the shadowy figures that roamed the house, waiting for the next victim. He had tried to escape, just like I had tried to do, but the curse never let go. It clung to you, tightening its grip until it was impossible to escape. I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing my legs to move. My feet stumbled backward, and as I turned to run, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of nails scraping against wood. The creature was behind me, moving with terrifying speed. I slammed into a stack of old boxes, sending them crashing to the ground. The noise echoed in the small attic, and for a split second, I thought the creature might have been momentarily distracted. But no, I could hear its breathing, deep and labored, close behind me. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to listen. Every instinct told me to turn around, to face it, but I couldn't. Then I felt it, something cold, wet, and rough brushed against my neck. The stench of decay filled the air, nauseating and thick, as if death itself had taken form. My spine stiffened, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. The creature's breath was hot against my skin, and then its voice, distorted and alien, whispered in my ear, "It's too late." The words cut through me like ice, freezing me in place. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only feel the weight of those eyes boring into my soul. And then, I heard the most horrific sound of all. A cracking, like bones breaking, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement, like something far too large shifting in the cramped attic. I turned, my eyes locking onto the creature's face, its eyes, wide and glowing, filled with something otherworldly. It was almost as if it was smiling, its jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. But it wasn't a smile of victory. No, it was something darker, a knowing, malicious grin, as if it had been waiting for this moment, for me to come here. For me to uncover the truth. The curse was inevitable, and it always claimed its next victim. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me as I crashed to the floor. The flashlight rolled from my hand, the beam casting erratic patterns across the walls. The creature loomed over me, its grotesque form filling the space, and I could do nothing but stare up in sheer terror as it reached down toward me with its cold, clawed hands. It was then I remembered the journals. My great-grandfather had written about the moments just before the curse claimed him, how the creature would speak in riddles, and how, no matter what you did, it would always win. He had fought to survive, but in the end, he had lost, just as I was about to lose. The last thing I saw was the creature's eyes, glowing with malice. And then, darkness. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The oppressive, suffocating silence that enveloped me like a thick, damp fog. I was lying on the cold attic floor, my body stiff and sore. My mind felt foggy, disoriented, and I couldn't quite remember what had happened. My breath came in shallow gasps as I slowly pushed myself up, my hands shaking. The creature. The darkness. It all felt like a half-forgotten nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. I knew it was real. I forced myself to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. My heart raced in my chest, and my eyes darted around the attic, searching for any sign of the creature. But it was gone. The space seemed unchanged, as though nothing had happened, yet everything felt wrong. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, darker, and the air felt thick with something unnatural. I stumbled toward the ladder, my hands gripping the rungs for support as I descended into the darkness below. The house was eerily quiet now. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of wind outside seemed amplified, mocking me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The sense of being hunted, of being pursued, gripped me tightly as I made my way through the house. I reached the kitchen, where the faint light from the street lamps outside filtered in through the curtains. The kitchen felt almost too normal, like a cruel reminder of what I had once known. The familiar, comforting sounds of everyday life were absent now. No longer did I hear the hum of the refrigerator, the clink of silverware, or the distant murmur of the television. Everything was still. And then I heard it again. The faintest sound. A scrape. A shadow moving in the periphery of my vision. I froze. The sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't see anything, just the dark, empty hallway stretching out before me, leading to the stairs. But I could feel it. I could feel the presence. The thing that had been following me, that had haunted my every step, was there, just beyond the corner. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back, my hand reaching for the nearest object I could find, a kitchen knife. It was ridiculous. A knife wouldn't stop it. Nothing would. But I had no choice. I crept toward the hallway, every step deliberate and slow, as if the very air might give away my position. I pressed my back against the wall, holding the knife tightly in my hand. I was a fool to think I could outrun it. I was a fool to think I could survive. And yet, I moved forward. The scraping sound grew louder, now unmistakable. I could hear something else too. A low, guttural growl, deep and vibrating, as though the walls themselves were growling at me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to see it. I stepped into the hallway, my eyes searching the shadows. And then I saw it. The creature stood at the far end, just out of reach of the dim light. It was crouched low, its body twitching as though it were ready to spring. The same glowing eyes stared at me from the darkness, fixed and unblinking. This time, I didn't freeze. I couldn't. It was now or never. With a scream of defiance, I lunged at it. The knife in my hand was useless, I knew that. But it didn't matter. I had to fight. I had to survive. The creature moved in an instant, faster than I could have imagined, its claws slicing through the air toward me. I barely managed to dodge, falling to the floor with a crash. The creature's weight crashed down on me, pinning me to the ground as its claws scraped across my face. The pain was blinding. I could taste blood, the metallic tang filling my mouth as I struggled beneath it. Its breath, hot and fetid, washed over me, and I could feel its strength, its overwhelming power. But as it loomed above me, I remembered something, my great-grandfather's journals, the warning he had given me about the curse. The creature was relentless, yes. It was terrifying. But there was one thing that could stop it. One thing that had worked in the past. I wasn't entirely sure why I remembered it, but the instinct kicked in, a flicker of hope amidst the terror. I had to act fast. I reached for the old pocket watch that my grandfather had left me, the one I had carried with me all these years. I held it up, and the creature paused, its eyes narrowing, its movements slowing. The pocket watch had been his salvation, his one chance to fight back. But it was too late for him. As the creature hesitated, I grasped the watch tighter, praying that it would work. It had to work. The creature hissed, its claws digging into my chest, and I could feel the life draining out of me, the weight of its presence crushing me from all sides. But then, as if by some miracle, the pocket watch flickered to life. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing, its form distorting in agony. The shadows around us twisted, warping like liquid, and then, with one final scream, it vanished into the darkness. A loud crash jolted me from my dazed state. The sound of something large tumbling, followed by an unnatural squeal. My heart skipped. The creatures had breached the house. I stood frozen in place for a long moment, a mix of fear and disbelief weighing heavily on my chest. Could this really be happening? Were they truly inside? The silence that followed the crash was deafening. It felt as though the world held its breath, the oppressive weight of my own anxiety becoming unbearable. I clenched my fists, the muscles in my arms trembling. My feet moved on their own accord, propelled by some primal urge to escape. I stumbled out of the hallway and into the living room, my gaze snapping around in search of an exit. The house felt smaller now, as if it had closed in on me while I wasn't looking. The floorboards creaked, and I froze. There was movement, slow, deliberate, just beyond the edge of my vision. A shadow darted across the room. Something was there, just out of reach. Something enormous. My pulse quickened. The noises grew louder now. They were everywhere. Scratching sounds from the walls, the low guttural growls echoing through the narrow hallways, followed by the unmistakable sounds of nails skittering on the floor. I couldn't tell how many there were. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were coming for me. I darted towards the kitchen, knowing it wasn't an ideal place to be trapped, but it was the only direction I could think of. As I ran, I heard the unmistakable skittering of claws following me. They were close. Too close. Suddenly, the door to the basement creaked open. My breath hitched. The thought of going down there, it was terrifying, but I knew there was nowhere else to go. I grabbed the handle with shaking hands, forcing myself to pull the door open and step down into the pitch-black darkness. It was colder down here, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and old wood. I could barely make out the steps beneath my feet, the world shrinking with each hesitant step. I had no idea where to go, what to do. All I could hear was my own breath and the distant, muffled thud of something moving in the dark. Was it them? Were they down here with me, waiting? The thought of being in this suffocating, oppressive space with those creatures filled me with a terror I could barely comprehend. I was trapped. I could feel it in the air. My mind spun with dread. A sudden movement from behind, cold, wet, and close. My body lurched in panic, but before I could react, something slammed into my back. The air was knocked from my lungs. I fell forward, the floor slamming into my face, my hands scrambling for purchase, but it was too late. I felt something wrap around my ankle, sharp claws digging into my flesh. A low, twisted laugh echoed around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole. The darkness swallowed me whole. Every inch of my body screamed for movement, for escape, but it was too late. I was too far gone. The claws that had wrapped around my ankle tightened, pulling me further into the abyss. A grotesque face appeared in front of me, horrible, twisted, its skin stretching unnaturally as it grinned down at me with eyes full of malice. I couldn't scream. The terror had sealed my throat, my mind spiraling in confusion. Was this the end? But then, as if something within me snapped, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. I fought back, kicking and thrashing in an attempt to break free from the vice-like grip on my ankle. My hand found a sharp object on the floor, a broken piece of wood, and I swung it wildly in the direction of the creature. The thing shrieked. The sound pierced my ears, filling me with an icy dread. It recoiled, and I took the opportunity to wrench myself free. I scrambled backward, the claws retracting as the creature disappeared into the shadows. I could barely see anything, the darkness suffocating, but I didn't stop. I ran, no! I stumbled toward what felt like an exit, hearing the rush of something large and fast closing in behind me. The pounding of footsteps reverberated in my ears. I wasn't alone. They were chasing me, their grotesque forms just beyond the edge of my sight. And then, in a final moment of clarity, I realized I wasn't escaping. The basement door, the one I had fought so hard to reach, was it even real? Or had it been part of the curse all along, trapping me in this endless cycle? A deafening crack rang out, and the world spun violently. As the night wore on, I felt the oppressive weight of those shadows pressing closer, too close. And finally, I understood. The curse had no end, no escape. I was already lost. It's too late now. There is no escape. The curse has me. And with it, I'm just one more victim in a long, forgotten line of souls, trapped by the hunger of the creatures who dwell beneath the city. The darkness that surrounds me now is no longer a void, it's a living thing. It breathes with me, moves with me, and in every crack and crevice, I feel their presence. They've always been here, beneath the surface, waiting. I can hear their whispers now. The voices of the dead, the lost, the ones who came before me. They're all trapped like I am, caught in the nightmare of this eternal hunt. And soon, they'll drag me deeper, pull me into the belly of the tunnels, until I, too, become part of the darkness, part of the grotesque creatures that prowl the underground. I hear them now. The skittering of their claws on the walls, the soft scraping sound as they approach. It's too late. I can't escape. It doesn't matter how fast I run, how hard I fight. I'm already marked, already claimed. I can feel them drawing nearer, their cold, cruel breath hot on the back of my neck. I turn, but there's nothing there. The shadows twist, bending at impossible angles, stretching like monstrous fingers, ready to close in on me. I want to scream, but the words catch in my throat. I want to run, but my legs won't move. The floor beneath me is shaking, the walls shifting as if the very ground is alive, pulsing with hunger. The creatures are getting closer, and I can't stop it. I try to make sense of it, but it's all too much. The noise, the shadows, the endless terror. All I can do now is wait for the inevitable. They're here. And I know, deep down, that once they claim me, I'll never be free. This place, the tunnels, the shadows, the creatures, will be my grave. And as the light fades from my eyes, I realize that the curse has no end. It doesn't die with me. It only moves on, from one generation to the next, leaving behind nothing but madness and death. And the darkness will always be there, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. The Temple in the Desert. It started with a map. A faded, withered piece of parchment that promised to lead me to something ancient, something hidden beneath the relentless heat of the Utah desert. As an archaeologist, I had spent years chasing whispers of forgotten civilizations, of lost temples and relics of the old world. But this map, it felt different. It wasn't just a find, it was a calling. A piece of history that had been buried, quite literally, for centuries. Something I was meant to discover. I should have known better than to trust it. The desert was quieter than I'd ever heard it. The wind had died down, leaving the barren landscape eerily still, as though it were holding its breath. The sun blazed overhead, merciless and unrelenting, but it wasn't the heat that unsettled me. No, it was the silence. It pressed in on me, a weight I couldn't shake. The map led me to an area where the sand shifted unnaturally, revealing the outlines of something beneath. The entrance to the temple. I had found it. The stone archway was half buried, its surface etched with strange symbols I didn't recognize. But as I stepped closer, something else caught my attention, an unfamiliar, almost imperceptible hum vibrating through the ground beneath my boots. I froze, a chill crawling up my spine despite the oppressive heat. What the hell is that? I whispered to myself, squinting at the arch. There was no sign of life, no movement. But that sound, that hum, it was unmistakable. Something ancient was alive beneath the earth. I knelt down, brushing the sand away from the stone. The hum grew louder. The archway seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the symbols on it shifting, changing. I felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to enter. But even as I stood there, preparing to step inside, I felt it, a subtle warning in the back of my mind. Something was wrong. But I had come this far. I couldn't back out now. I stepped through the arch. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world seemed to twist. The temperature dropped, the air thickened, and I could no longer hear the sounds of the desert. Instead, there was a low, rumbling sound, something like a growl, deep and resonant. The walls of the temple seemed to close in on me, as though the very stone were alive, watching me. My heart raced. I moved forward cautiously, my flashlight casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the space felt. It was as though the laws of physics didn't apply here. The dimensions of the corridors seemed wrong, stretching in ways that made my mind strain to comprehend. And then I saw it. A figure. Standing in the center of a vast chamber, cloaked in shadows, its form too dark, too still, to be a person. The air around it shimmered as if reality itself were bending, twisting, as it looked at me with eyes that were not human. Not even close. I stood frozen, caught between awe and terror. This was not an ancient civilization. This was something else entirely. Something older. Something alien. The figure moved toward me, its form shifting as it stepped closer, and the growl grew louder. It echoed in the chamber, reverberating through the very stones beneath my feet. The whispers started then. Soft at first, like a wind stirring dead leaves, but growing louder, clearer, like voices speaking directly into my mind. They weren't words, at least not in any language I could understand. It was more like sensations, feelings, emotions flooding my consciousness. Rage, hunger, endless, gnawing hunger. A hunger that reached out toward me, toward my very soul. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to leave. I couldn't stay here. I was already too far in, and whatever this thing was, it wasn't something I was meant to encounter. But the doorway, the way out, was gone. The chamber stretched impossibly around me, and the figure was coming closer, its shape becoming more defined, more monstrous. And then I saw it, the other things. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Creatures, twisting and writhing, their forms not quite solid, like shadows that existed just outside the realm of human comprehension. They had no faces, no true shapes, but their eyes, countless eyes, glowed in the darkness, watching me, waiting. The growl became a chorus, a terrible sound that vibrated in my bones. And then, in the depths of my panic, I realized the truth. The temple was not a place. It was a doorway. A doorway to another dimension, a world where the laws of nature no longer applied, where ancient, incomprehensible beings roamed free. And I had stumbled into their domain. I turned, desperate to find any way out, but the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting like a living thing. The air felt thick, choking me with its unnatural weight. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I realized I had no idea where I was anymore, or how I had gotten here. The temple no longer felt like a structure, it felt like a cage, a trap. The growls, the voices, intensified. They were in my mind now, burrowing into my thoughts, scraping at the edges of my sanity. I could no longer tell if I was hearing them or feeling them, but the sensation was the same. They were everywhere. Inescapable. I stumbled forward, trying to push through the choking darkness, but every step felt like it was taking me deeper into the abyss. The temperature dropped even further. My breath puffed out in cold clouds. I could hear something moving behind me, scratching, scraping. The sound of claws on stone, too close for comfort. I turned around, heart thudding in my chest. A shape moved in the shadows, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. A ripple of movement, like a mass of dark water, shifting and twitching. Something was coming. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was chasing me. Two glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It was a rat. But not any rat. Its size was impossible. Its body was easily as long as I was tall, with massive claws and teeth that gleamed in the dim light. Its fur was matted, slick with some oily substance that made it gleam in an unnatural way. And its eyes, they weren't just eyes. They were like pits, sucking in the light, endless and hollow. I took a step back, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But the thing moved closer, its movements fast, fluid, almost predatory. And behind it, more shapes began to appear, other rats, just as large, their eyes glowing in the dark. They moved in a strange, synchronized way, like they were part of a greater whole, a hive mind that was closing in on me. I backed away, my hands trembling as I gripped the flashlight tighter, trying to push back the overwhelming fear that was threatening to drown me. The walls around me seemed to close in, the air thicker, the darkness more oppressive. The whispers grew louder. The growls morphed into something more distinct, more urgent, as though they were no longer speaking to each other, but to me. The creatures weren't just there to watch. They wanted something. I had to get out. I had to escape. But the way out was nowhere to be found. The temple, or whatever this place was, didn't make sense anymore. The walls warped and stretched, creating endless corridors that all seemed to lead to the same spot, the center of the chamber, where the glowing eyes watched me, unmoving. A realization hit me then, there was no escape. I was trapped here. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that I had to get away. The creatures behind me moved faster, their heavy feet slapping the stone in rhythmic unison. I could hear their claws scraping, the rumble of their growls vibrating through the ground. Their pursuit was relentless. Every time I thought I might outrun them, they seemed to get closer, as though they had all the time in the world to catch me. I rounded a corner, desperate for a break, but the tunnel only seemed to get darker, more suffocating. The walls were slick with moisture now, the air thick with the smell of decay. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the fear clawing at me, gnawing at my every thought. There was no place to hide, no way to escape. And then, in the darkest corner of my mind, I heard it. The voice, clearer than the rest, speaking directly to me. "You are the sacrifice." I froze. The words echoed in my skull, each syllable laced with an ancient, cold malevolence. The rats weren't just mindless predators. They were here for me. I was the one they had been waiting for. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The growls drew closer, their voices like a low hum vibrating through the air. The darkness closed in around me, suffocating, relentless. I felt the first sharp pinch of claws at my ankle, followed by another at my wrist, and another. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the endless sea of glowing eyes, watching, waiting. And then, nothing. I awoke with a jolt, gasping for air, but it wasn't the air I had known before. This air was stale, suffocating, like it had been trapped in this place for centuries. My head throbbed, and my limbs felt heavy, like I had been submerged in something cold and unyielding for far too long. I tried to move, but my body felt stiff. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold stone floor of a vast chamber. The faint glow from some unknown source bathed the surroundings in an eerie light. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched deeply into the stone. They pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to match the thudding of my own heart. What had happened? The rats, the temple, they had been real, hadn't they? The voice that had spoken to me, the whispers in the dark, it was all real. But now, where was I? I pushed myself up, wiping the sweat from my brow, trying to steady my breathing. The panic that had been a constant presence in my chest seemed to have momentarily dulled, but it was still there, lurking. My surroundings felt unfamiliar, and yet there was something about them that seemed right. As though I belonged here. I blinked, trying to clear my mind. Focus, I told myself. There had to be a way out. I couldn't stay here, not with those things still hunting me. I took a tentative step forward, my boots echoing in the silent chamber. The walls seemed to grow closer with every step I took, the symbols etched into them moving subtly, shifting as if alive. I couldn't make sense of them, there were no clear patterns, just a tangle of chaotic shapes. Some seemed to shift in and out of focus, making my head spin. But I had to keep moving. I had to escape. I scanned the room, my heart pounding again as I looked for any sign of an exit. The chamber stretched into the shadows, the ceiling high above me, but there was no obvious door or way out. Just endless stone walls and the shifting symbols. And then I heard it. The faintest scrape. A rustling sound, like something sliding across stone. My heart jumped into my throat. No. Not now. I froze, straining my ears. The sound was closer now, unmistakable. It was coming from the far side of the chamber, just beyond the pool of light. Something, or someone, was there. I couldn't see anything, not at first, but then the light shifted, and I saw movement. The first thing I noticed was the eyes. They gleamed like twin orbs of molten gold, too large to belong to anything natural. The figure stepped into the light, and my breath caught in my chest. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was a slick, dark gray, smooth like the surface of some ancient stone, but it seemed to shimmer, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. Its face was elongated, with sharp, angular features that were both animalistic and alien. Its eyes, those glowing, golden eyes, stared directly at me, unblinking, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The thing didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched. Its presence alone was enough to make my knees weak, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to run. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice raw from the terror that gripped me. It didn't answer. Instead, the creature stepped closer, its long, spindly fingers dragging across the stone floor with an unsettling screech. I backed away, but the thing's eyes never left me. There was something wrong, something deeply wrong with this place. And I was certain, with a chilling clarity, that I wasn't meant to be here. Not anymore. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder until they filled the room, crawling into my ears like insects. The air felt colder, and the walls seemed to close in even more. It was as if the entire chamber was alive, breathing with me, watching me. The creature extended a hand, its long fingers outstretched toward me. The air around it seemed to warp, the temperature dropping even further. "Run," I heard the voice again, this time clearer, more insistent. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I turned and sprinted for the farthest corner of the chamber, my mind racing with terror. I couldn't go back to the darkness where the rats had been. I couldn't go anywhere near that creature. But as I ran, the whispers grew louder. The eyes of the thing seemed to follow me, glowing brighter with each step I took. The walls began to shift, the ground beneath me trembling, as if the whole temple was coming alive to trap me once again. I stumbled and fell, my body crashing to the cold stone floor. My flashlight rolled out of my hand and skidded across the ground, its beam illuminating nothing but darkness beyond. The creature's voice sounded, now directly in my ear, low and almost musical. "You are already lost." The words chilled me to the core. And just as I tried to push myself up, the world around me began to twist, the symbols on the walls warping and shifting like liquid, flowing in unnatural patterns. I was no longer in control. The darkness was closing in. The eyes were watching. And there was nowhere left to run. I don't know how long I was on the floor, struggling to breathe, my body trapped in a state of terror. The whispers had turned into guttural growls, resonating deep within my skull. Every inch of the room felt as if it were alive, as though it were consuming me from all sides. The air was thick now, suffocating, the walls pressing on me. I could still feel the creature's gaze, its presence burning into my very soul. It wasn't just watching me, it was feeding on my fear. I pushed myself up with shaking arms, my head swimming with confusion. The flashlight lay just out of reach, its beam still wavering, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way back to reality, to the world I knew. But as I staggered to my feet, I realized that nothing felt real anymore. The stone beneath my boots seemed to give way, warping, as if the ground itself were shifting, trying to throw me off balance. I took a step forward, and the symbols on the walls rippled like liquid in the glow of my flashlight. They weren't just markings, they were alive, pulsing with some unnatural rhythm. I tried to focus, tried to make sense of the chaos around me. But then, my eyes fell on something in the distance, something that wasn't there before. A door. Or at least, what appeared to be a door. A doorway stood at the far end of the chamber, framed by more of those strange symbols. The edges of the doorway were jagged, the stone surrounding it cracked and torn as if something had ripped through it. Was it an escape? Or was it another trap? I didn't care. At this point, I would take any chance to leave this cursed place. I stumbled toward it, my heart pounding louder with every step. The growling sounds from the darkness were growing more frantic, like something was chasing me. I could feel the creature's gaze on my back, its eyes burning into me like molten iron. The closer I got to the doorway, the more the air around it seemed to hum, vibrating with an unseen force. The symbols on the walls surrounding the entrance shifted faster, spiraling into dizzying patterns. I could almost hear them calling to me, beckoning me forward. I reached out for the doorframe, my hand trembling. Just as my fingers touched the cold stone, a blinding light flashed from the doorway, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that I gasped for breath. The air was freezing, sharp as ice, and I could feel it biting at my skin. The light within the door seemed to swallow the darkness of the chamber, drawing everything into it. I didn't think. I just stepped forward, hoping, praying that I would find something, anything, that could get me out of here. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the world around me twisted again. The ground vanished beneath my feet, and I was falling, tumbling through a black void, the silence deafening. I reached out, flailing, desperate to find something solid. But there was nothing. Just endless darkness, stretching on until I had no sense of where I was or how far I had fallen. And then, I landed. The impact was soft, as if I had fallen onto a bed of feathers. But the moment I hit the ground, the air exploded with a sound so deafening that my ears rang with the intensity. The light from the doorway vanished completely, leaving me in total blackness. I sat up, my chest heaving, trying to gather my bearings. But there was nothing familiar here, nothing to ground me. The air felt strange, oppressive. The silence was absolute. I strained to listen, but there was nothing, not even the faintest echo of sound. It was as if I had fallen into some other dimension, a place where the rules of the world I knew no longer applied. I tried to move, to stand, but my legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I had no idea where I was. There were no walls, no floor beneath my feet, no point of reference. And then I heard it again. A rustling sound, distant at first, like something skittering across the ground. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver of recognition down my spine. The rats. I held my breath, my eyes darting wildly in the pitch-black darkness. The sound was growing closer, echoing in the silence. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything but the soft, rhythmic scratching of claws against stone. And then, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the distance, faint at first, but growing brighter with every passing second. It was the same cold, golden glow I had seen before. But this time, there were more of them. The eyes multiplied, flickering like torches in the darkness, and then I heard the unmistakable skittering of paws. Dozens, maybe more, growing closer, their movements swift and sure. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The eyes were getting closer, circling me like predators stalking their prey. The rats were everywhere, their eyes reflecting in the void, an endless swarm that was closing in on me. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my body wouldn't move. I was trapped. And then, I felt it. Something sharp scraped across my leg, followed by the soft, wet sound of claws against flesh. I looked down, and the last thing I saw was the massive shape of a rat, a grotesque, monstrous thing with eyes as big as my head, its teeth glinting in the darkness as it lunged toward me. The darkness swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I was unconscious. The pain in my leg was excruciating, but it wasn't the physical agony that dragged me back into the world. It was the sensation of something watching me. Something waiting. My eyes snapped open, and I immediately regretted it. The darkness was suffocating, more so than before. I was still on the ground, my body sore, but I could feel the chill of the air pressing on me, the silence now deafening. I didn't dare move at first, my breath shallow as I waited for the feeling of those glowing eyes to fade. But they didn't. The eyes were still there, hovering just at the edge of my vision. 1,000 pairs of them, gleaming with malevolent intent, circling me like a pack of hungry wolves. The rats had surrounded me, their beady eyes never leaving me. The low rustling sound was louder now, as if they were all moving at once, inching closer. I forced myself to sit up, my heart pounding in my chest. The pain in my leg had dulled, but I could still feel the warm trickle of blood sticky against my skin. I looked down, expecting to see the deep gashes from the creature's claws, but there was nothing. The wounds were there, but they were healing. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. How was I still alive? How was my body mending itself? A deep, guttural growl broke my trance, and I whipped my head toward the sound. Something had moved in the darkness, something far too large to be human, too grotesque to be real. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, like it was alive. The air around me crackled with static, an unseen force pushing in from all sides. Then, I saw it. A massive creature emerged from the shadows, its silhouette growing larger and clearer with each passing second. Its body was like that of a rat, but impossibly huge, its fur matted and slick with something dark and wet. Its eyes, those gleaming, predatory eyes, locked onto mine, and I froze, unable to look away. I could feel it, deep inside my bones, that the thing wasn't just watching me. It knew me. It had been waiting for me. For what, I didn't know, but the weight of its gaze pressed down on me like 1,000 tons. The rat's jaws parted, revealing rows of sharp, yellow teeth. Its breath was putrid, the smell of decay filling the air. It stepped closer, and with every step it took, I felt the floor beneath me tremble, as if the whole dimension was shaking with the presence of this thing. I tried to move, to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, my body trembling with fear. The rats around me grew bolder, creeping closer, their eyes glimmering with hunger. There was no escape. The creature opened its mouth wider, letting out a low, vibrating hiss that echoed through the void. The sound sent a shock of terror straight through me. But then something strange happened. The growl morphed, becoming something more human. It wasn't just a rat anymore. The voice, it was speaking to me. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered. Its voice was an unsettling mix of a growl and a hiss, a sound that scraped against my nerves. "This place is not meant for your kind." I could hardly process its words. My mind was spiraling, trying to make sense of what was happening. Where was I? What was this place? How was it possible that a creature like this, something out of a nightmare, could speak, could even think? "You have already crossed the threshold," it continued, its glowing eyes flickering with an eerie light. "There is no going back." You belong to the depths now. The depths. The words felt like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me, as if they were pulling me deeper into the abyss with every passing second. My head spun, and I could feel the grip of panic tightening around my chest. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might lose consciousness again. But then, something within me snapped. I couldn't give in. I couldn't die here. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pain in my leg, ignoring the growing sense of vertigo. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here, not with this thing looming over me, its eyes glowing with an unsettling promise of death. The rats were closing in, their eyes unblinking, but the creature, the enormous rat, stayed still, watching me with an almost amused expression. It was as if it was enjoying my fear, watching me struggle, waiting for the right moment to strike. I didn't wait for that moment. I turned and ran. The rats scattered as I bolted through the darkness, my legs carrying me on instinct. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the sound of skittering paws echoing behind me like a chorus of death. I could feel the eyes on me, could hear the scraping of claws on stone as they pursued me through the void. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I stumbled through the dark, my mind racing, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't let myself slow down. I could hear the creatures growl in the distance, but I refused to look back. Then, just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, I saw something ahead. A flicker of light. It was weak at first, like the faint glow of a distant star, but it was there. And for the first time since I had fallen into this nightmare, I felt a glimmer of hope. I pushed forward, my feet pounding against the shifting ground, my breath ragged until I reached the light. And then I realized. It wasn't light at all. It was a trap. Before I could react, the ground gave way beneath me once more. And I fell. I don't know how far I fell. The darkness swallowed me whole, the air rushing past my ears as my body dropped through the void. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the endless chasm beneath me. I flailed, my limbs tangled in the air, trying desperately to find something solid, something to break my fall. But there was nothing. The fall seemed endless, time stretching as I descended deeper into the unknown. I could feel the edges of my consciousness fraying, the weight of the terror pressing down on me, numbing everything but the cold, crushing fear. And then, suddenly, the fall stopped. I crashed onto something hard, my body jerking violently. My head slammed into the ground, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, my head was spinning, and my limbs were stiff. I groaned, forcing my eyes open, blinking against the sudden light that surrounded me. The brightness hurt at first, too stark, too white, unnatural. It was as if I had fallen into some kind of labyrinth, one that wasn't bound by the rules of nature. I sat up, wincing at the pain in my back and neck. My surroundings were surreal. The walls around me shimmered like liquid, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly glow. The air felt charged, thick with static. I could almost taste it on my tongue. I was still in the tunnel, but it was different now. This place was alive. I could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the walls, almost like a heartbeat, an echo of something ancient and alive. And the silence. It was oppressive. Too quiet. No rats, no growls, no movement. Just that constant, low pulse in the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I pulled myself to my feet, my legs shaky, and took a few unsteady steps forward. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, as though it were alive, breathing. The walls around me stretched and contracted with every movement, like they were watching me, judging me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had stepped into a place that was never meant for human feet. I moved cautiously, scanning my surroundings. The tunnel stretched endlessly in front of me, the walls flickering with the same unsettling light, the air heavy with a strange weight. There was a faint scent in the air, something metallic, tinged with something sweet. The smell of decay. The rats. They had to be here. But where were they? I hadn't seen one since I fell. My heart skipped a beat. Had they left me? The thought almost comforted me, but then the faint scratching sound began. It was faint at first, just a whisper, like tiny claws scraping against the stone. I paused, listening. The sound grew louder, more pronounced. A dozen, maybe more, of the creatures moving just out of sight, as if they were lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. I turned, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, my breath catching in my throat. The light flickered, casting strange shapes against the walls, and for a split second, I thought I saw something moving within it, a dark, towering figure. Then it was gone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was being watched. The rats were here, all around me, circling, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. They were patient, waiting. I could feel them, their presence suffocating, like the weight of 1,000 eyes on my skin. I began to move again, faster this time, panic crawling up my spine. The walls seemed to close in on me, the light flickering, casting long, stretching shadows that twisted and writhed like something alive. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. Something large had moved. The floor trembled beneath me. Then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing. Slow. Deep. Ragged. I turned slowly, my breath shallow, as the creature stepped into the light. It was bigger than before, towering over me like a nightmare made flesh. Its fur was matted, slick with something dark and foul. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, yellow and wild. The creature's mouth parted, revealing rows of glistening teeth, each one sharp and curved like knives. But it wasn't just a rat anymore. The shape was growing, distorting. Its body stretched and twisted, mutating before my eyes, until it was no longer a rat at all. It was something else. Something far worse. It towered over me, its body shifting and writhing, the shape constantly changing, like a fluid nightmare made flesh. The walls around us pulsed with the same ominous rhythm as the creature's movements. The smell of decay grew stronger, suffocating. I took a step back, but it was no use. The creature was already moving toward me, its massive limbs dragging against the floor with sickening slowness. Its eyes never left me. Its growl vibrated through the ground, echoing in my bones. I felt trapped. No way out. No escape. And then, in that moment of sheer terror, I understood. This place wasn't just alive. It was alive with the things from beyond. The rats weren't just rats, they were worshippers, keepers of a force older than humanity itself. And I had fallen into their world, a world where human life meant nothing, where survival was impossible. I backed into the wall, my chest tightening, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The creature was close now, close enough that I could see the twisted, grotesque features of its face. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel it in my soul, the creature's hunger, its need to consume. And then, just as it reached out for me, its claws gleaming in the light, the ground beneath me cracked. the world fell apart. Shadow on the bridge. It all started off foggy evening. The kind where the mist hangs low, curling around street lamps, and the air feels thicker than it should. My name is Aaron, and I was a city worker, just another cog in the machine. Nothing extraordinary about me or the job. We worked under the old bridge in the heart of the city, maintaining the forgotten pipes, repairing wiring, and dealing with all the things that others didn't want to think about. Most of the time, it was dirty, unpleasant work, but I didn't mind. It was steady. But something had changed. At first, it was nothing more than a slight discomfort. Strange sounds echoing through the pipes at night, soft whispers I couldn't place. I chalked it up to the age of the bridge, maybe the water trickling through the old channels causing vibrations I wasn't used to. But as the days passed, it started to become more than just an irritation. I was the kind of guy who preferred explanations. There had to be one, right? Maybe the fog wasn't helping. The city wasn't exactly known for having the cleanest air. The tunnel beneath the bridge was just that, a tunnel with metal beams stretching over the murky water. Nothing glamorous about it. Yet lately, it felt wrong. I was working late that night, a few hours after everyone else had gone home. The others had started to notice the strange occurrences too. The quiet, the sudden drops in temperature, the feeling of being watched. But none of them stayed late like I did. They preferred to leave before it got too dark, and I'd be left to finish what they couldn't. It wasn't until I heard the scratching that I first realized something was wrong. At first, I thought it was rats, those vermin that thrived in the dark corners of the city. They were a common sight here, their tiny claws clinking on the metal pipes. But the sound was different this time. It was heavier, louder. Like something larger was moving through the dark, something more menacing. I turned my head, trying to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the tunnel walls. I could hear the scurrying again, closer now. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was just another rat. But then I saw it. At the far end of the tunnel, there was a shape, a shadow, moving against the wall. It wasn't a rat. It was too big, too wrong. The silhouette lingered for a moment, and then it seemed to vanish, dissolving into the fog. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. What was that? I told myself it was nothing. I tried to convince myself that the shadows played tricks on you when you were working alone in a dimly lit space. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. A few more minutes passed, and the scratching stopped. Silence. But it was the kind of silence that felt suffocating. The kind where you know something is waiting just beyond your vision, watching. I tried to focus on the work in front of me, tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease that was settling in my bones. That's when I heard it again. A shuffle, like a foot dragging across the ground. But this time, it wasn't from the far end of the tunnel, it was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. There was nothing. Just the empty tunnel stretching endlessly in both directions. My breath was quick and shallow, and I felt like my heart might burst from my chest. The fog was getting thicker, creeping in from the entrance to the tunnel, swallowing the edges of the dim light. I glanced down at the floor. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a trail, like wood marks where something had moved. Something large. Something heavy. The footsteps. The dragging sound. They weren't from rats. I turned to leave, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't form into words. Something was wrong. The air felt wrong. The pressure in the tunnel seemed to shift, like something was rising from beneath the ground, pressing on the walls, on my chest. I stepped back, my foot catching on a loose wire. I stumbled but caught myself before I fell. That's when I saw it again, the shadow. This time, it was more than just a fleeting silhouette. It was a form, clear and solid in the dim light, standing at the far end of the tunnel. A figure. Tall. Thin. Impossibly thin. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was staring at me. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, crawled up my spine. My hand gripped the flashlight so tight that my knuckles turned white. I tried to move. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figure moved, a slow, deliberate pace, closing the distance between us with unnerving precision. I could hear my own breath, sharp and ragged, echoing in the empty space around me. The figure was getting closer, the shape becoming more defined, more real. I was frozen, paralyzed. It stopped, just out of reach. The shadow smiled. That was when I realized I was not going to make it out of this tunnel alive. The last thing I remember was the sound of something large, something massive, scraping against the floor. The feeling of teeth, sharp and jagged, closing in around me. And then, silence. I woke up on the cold floor of the tunnel hours later, disoriented and aching. The shape was gone. The fog had cleared. The scratching sound had stopped. But the marks were still there. The wet trail. The drag marks. And I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Whatever was out there wasn't finished yet. I don't know how long I stayed on the cold floor of the tunnel, too afraid to move, too shaken to think. My mind was still clouded, caught between what I had seen and the realization that something was terribly wrong beneath the bridge. Something had come for me, something far worse than I could ever explain. I crawled to my feet, hands trembling, and grabbed my flashlight. It flickered again, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. I stumbled through the fog, past the spot where the shadow had stood. The air felt thick, pressing against my chest like the hands of unseen monsters. The sounds of the city above me were muffled, far off. I tried to focus on the distant hum of traffic, but the silence in the tunnel was so oppressive. The faintest echo of my own footsteps was the only sound that didn't feel wrong. As I moved toward the exit, I glanced back one last time. The tunnel stretched behind me, dark and unfathomable. The shadows seemed deeper now, like the walls themselves were closing in. I wasn't just being paranoid. I could feel the presence, something lurking just beyond the edges of the light. I pushed forward, ignoring the nausea building in my stomach. When I finally emerged from the tunnel, the cool night air hit my face, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped whatever nightmare had tried to claim me. But the unease lingered. It gnawed at me, the thought that I hadn't truly left. The next few days were a blur. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the mind. Maybe I had been exhausted. Maybe the darkness of the tunnel had played with my senses. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. Something had been in there with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow had followed me, that it was still waiting for me, just out of sight. The marks on the floor, the dragging sounds, they were proof that something had moved, something big. But what could it be? What kind of creature could hide in the deep recesses of an underground world and leave no trace except fear? I began noticing things around the city that didn't seem right. Strange sightings on the streets, people talking in hushed voices about odd figures they'd seen near the bridge. Every time I passed by, I saw shadows in the corners of my vision, darting out of sight just as I turned my head. I couldn't trust my eyes anymore. And then it happened again. I was back at the bridge. It had been 2 days since the night in the tunnel, but I couldn't stop myself. The feeling was overwhelming, an itch that I couldn't scratch. I needed to know if it was still out there, if the creature had returned. I told myself it was just another inspection, that I was there to check the integrity of the bridge. But in the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't fooling anyone. I was searching for something I could never find, or something I hoped would never find me. The fog was thicker tonight, clinging to the air like a blanket. I walked along the bridge, each step slow and cautious, my eyes darting around, waiting for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No strange shapes. No sounds. Just the cold, creeping fog. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, staring into the dark abyss beneath. I could almost hear the water flowing beneath the stone, the rush of currents carrying away whatever secrets lay beneath. For a moment, it felt peaceful. But that fleeting sense of calm was shattered by a sudden scraping noise. Not from beneath, but above. I looked up. There, in the corner of my vision, I saw it again. The shadow. But it wasn't just a figure this time. It was a presence, an undeniable force hanging in the air, blocking the light from the street lamps. I couldn't see its shape clearly, but I knew it was there, and I knew it was watching me. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to acknowledge that I was seeing it again. But the air around me shifted, and I could hear it, the sound of dragging feet, slow and deliberate, moving toward me. It was real. My heart pounded in my chest, and my body froze. I wanted to run, to scream, but the words caught in my throat. My legs wouldn't move. The shadow moved closer, its presence growing stronger, more oppressive. It was too much. I looked around for an escape, but the fog had thickened even more, the edges of the world blurring until I could no longer make out anything except the overwhelming darkness that seemed to close in on me. That's when I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. Cold. Like ice. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the heavy fog and the bridge stretching endlessly in both directions. I was alone. Alone. But not really. Something was here with me, something I couldn't see, something I couldn't fight. I couldn't understand it. The terror. The presence. It was suffocating. And the worst part was the sound, the scraping, dragging, moving. Slowly, relentlessly. It was closer now. Then, a low growl, more felt than heard, rumbled from the shadows. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. A sound so primal it froze me to my core. The dark mass above me stirred, and I could feel its weight, pressing in, crushing the very air I was breathing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't move. The shadows began to shift, stretching toward me like fingers reaching out of the abyss, and I knew, deep inside, that I wouldn't make it out of this bridge. I wasn't alone anymore. And this time, there would be no escape. The air had turned suffocating, thick with an overwhelming weight. I tried to move, tried to scream, but my body refused to obey. The shadows were closing in, swirling around me, and for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I was awake or trapped in some nightmarish hallucination. My heart thundered in my chest, and my breathing became shallow, too quick, too frantic. It felt like the bridge itself was alive, the stones beneath my feet groaning, as if they were part of some ancient creature slowly awakening. And then I heard it again. The dragging sound. It was unmistakable. It was behind me. Closer. So much closer now. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to flee, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the shadows seemed to shift, to blur, making it impossible to pinpoint anything solid. There was no form, no figure, just an ever-growing presence that filled the space behind me, like something was watching from the darkness, lurking just out of sight. I forced myself to take a step forward, each movement heavy, as if I were dragging myself through quicksand. I needed to escape. But how? Where? I could feel the edges of the fog closing in tighter. The coldness in the air had turned to a biting chill, crawling beneath my skin, sinking into my bones. It was getting harder to breathe. Each breath felt more labored, as if the very atmosphere had become toxic, thick with fear and something darker, something that shouldn't exist. And then, the growl returned. It rumbled deep, low, almost too quiet to hear, yet it vibrated through my chest, shaking me to my core. This time, it was not just a sound, but a presence. A warning. And then I felt it. A shift. Something stirred, moving just behind me, brushing against the edge of my awareness. I couldn't look. I couldn't. If I turned, if I saw what was behind me, I might never leave this place. My legs were already trembling, my body unsteady from fear. I had to focus, had to escape. But how? I took another step, faster now, my pulse pounding in my ears. My flashlight's beam flickered wildly, casting distorted shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. And then, suddenly, the beam went out completely. The world plunged into pitch-black darkness. I froze, panic rising in my throat. The silence that followed was suffocating. But then the shadows shifted again, almost imperceptibly. And I felt it. The air had changed. I could feel something moving around me now, something bigger than anything I could comprehend. My breath came in sharp gasps, each exhale turning to vapor in the cold. I heard it. The unmistakable scrape of claws on stone. It was close. Too close. My entire body screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything to escape. But I couldn't move. And then I heard it, the softest sound of something breathing. Something breathing directly in my ear. I spun around in a panic, expecting to find myself face to face with whatever creature had been lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the relentless, oppressive darkness. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching out for any semblance of stability. The bridge, this once familiar place, had become a nightmare. The shadows stretched longer, darker, twisting like they were alive. The fog was thick now, almost solid, like a wall closing in on me from every side. The dragging noise was back, louder this time, more insistent. Something was moving. Something was coming. I didn't know where to go. Every step I took felt wrong. The ground seemed to shift beneath me. The air felt like it was pressing down from all directions. The fog was no longer just around me, it was inside my lungs, choking me, filling my head with a dizzying sense of unreality. The growl came again, louder now. And then, crack. A snap of something hard, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the stones, closer than ever before. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see it, but my body betrayed me. I turned my head just enough to glimpse a silhouette, a hulking figure, crouching in the shadows, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were not the eyes of a man, nor any animal I had ever known. These eyes glowed, reflecting the dim light, and they were locked onto me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was frozen, my body seized with terror. The shadow stepped forward, its massive form just barely perceptible, like it was made of the darkness itself. The air around me seemed to thicken, the space distorting, as though the very fabric of reality was warping. I wanted to run. I should have run. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop staring at those eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. I heard a ripping sound, followed by a scream I didn't even recognize as my own. The darkness closed in on me, swallowing everything. I was falling into the blackness, into the depths of whatever hell had opened beneath me. And in that moment, the last thing I heard was the dragging sound. Closer. Closer. Too close. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my lungs burning as if I had been submerged underwater. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel the cold stone beneath my fingertips, the gritty texture of the bridge's surface pressing into my palm. I was alive. I was breathing. But the sense of dread that clung to my skin wouldn't let go. It was like a shadow that wrapped itself around me, dragging me down into something darker than I could ever understand. I tried to sit up, my head pounding, dizzy from the sudden shift from nightmare to reality. The world was eerily silent, too silent. No sound of the wind. No distant hum of traffic. Just the low, oppressive stillness that hung in the air, as though the very space around me was holding its breath. I scanned the area, heart racing again as my flashlight flickered weakly to life in my trembling hands. The beam cut through the void, revealing nothing but the familiar structure of the old bridge, damp stone walls, rusted iron railings, and the fog that still clung to the air like an ancient curse. But something was wrong. I could feel it. The shadows were moving. I turned quickly, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead as I desperately tried to rationalize what I was seeing. The shapes around me, what had once seemed like harmless shadows, were no longer still. They twisted and writhed, undulating like living things. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. The dragging noise, the scraping claws, returned, but this time it was not distant. It was close. Too close. The sound seemed to be coming from within the stone itself, reverberating through the ground and into my bones. It felt as if the very bridge was alive, pulsing with something dark, something ancient, waiting for me to make a move. I wanted to run. My body screamed at me to flee, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My mind was locked in place, trapped in the horror of what I had just witnessed and what was about to unfold. I couldn't ignore the instinct that told me, no, warned me, that I was not alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A flicker of something in the shadows. It was back. The creature, or whatever it was, hadn't just disappeared. It had followed me. Trapped me in the very place where I had once felt safe, where I had crossed so many times in the past, oblivious to the nightmare that lurked just beneath the surface. I had to get out. There was no other option. My mind raced, searching for some escape, some way to break free from this suffocating nightmare. But every direction felt wrong. Every sound felt like it was leading me deeper into the unknown. The growl came again, louder this time. It was no longer just a sound. It was a vibration in the very air around me, shaking the stone beneath my feet. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog, but nothing. No figure. No movement. Just the oppressive, suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. A whisper, soft at first, as if carried on the wind. Run. It was clear. Too clear. I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. The whisper came again, this time closer, like it was coming from within the very shadows themselves. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human. It was something else. Something old. I had to move. The creature was out there. I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't let it get me. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the stone, but no matter how fast I went, the feeling of the creature's presence grew heavier. The shadows stretched longer, reaching for me, pulling at the edges of my vision, making it impossible to tell where the bridge ended and the darkness began. I reached the end of the bridge, but it wasn't a relief. There was no escape. The fog had thickened, blocking any view beyond, suffocating everything in a thick white blanket. The sound of my footsteps was muffled now, drowned by the unnatural silence that enveloped me. I stopped. My chest heaved as I tried to gather my thoughts. My eyes darted around in the thickening mist. It was no use. I couldn't see anything. Then, I felt it again. A shift in the air. The pressure. The weight. Something was moving toward me, and it was fast. Too fast. Before I could react, something cold and sharp grabbed my arm, yanking me backward with a force that nearly tore my shoulder from its socket. I gasped, struggling to free myself, but the grip tightened. My mind raced, but all I could think of was that voice, that whisper in my ear that had come from nowhere. The shadows around me shifted once more, revealing just enough of the creature's form. Its glowing eyes, those eyes, stared into mine, and in that moment, I knew there was no escaping. There was no running. The bridge wasn't a place. It wasn't a simple structure, it was a trap. A voice, the same eerie whisper, echoed in my mind. You never should have come here. And then, the shadows closed in. The cold grip around my arm tightened, pulling me backward with a force that felt like it was crushing me. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath shallow as the fog swallowed the last vestiges of the bridge. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the nightmare I was trapped in. I couldn't escape. No matter how hard I struggled, no matter how loudly I screamed, the shadows were closing in on me. I was no longer alone. The whisper was louder now, a harsh hiss that seemed to crawl beneath my skin. The creature's presence, its eyes burning through the fog, loomed larger and more imposing with every passing second. I tried to move, to break free, but my body refused to obey. My legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground by the weight of fear pressing down on me. The bridge beneath my feet was no longer solid. It felt like it was shifting, moving, like the very ground was alive, bending and warping in response to the creature's presence. I could feel it in my bones, this unnatural energy, this force that was tearing apart the world I once knew. I heard the scratching sound again, closer now. It was like claws against metal, the scrape of something ancient, relentless. The sound echoed in the oppressive silence, bouncing off the stone walls of the bridge and rattling through my skull. "Please." My voice came out as a whisper, but it was drowned by the rising roar of the creature's presence, its shadow swallowing the light of my flashlight. The beam flickered again, then went out entirely, leaving me in darkness. I was trapped. A cold laugh, low and menacing, echoed from the depths of the fog, sending chills down my spine. It wasn't human. It was the sound of something far older, far more terrifying than anything I could comprehend. The creature's eyes gleamed in the darkness, like twin fires burning with malice, watching me, waiting. In a burst of panic, I broke free from its grip, stumbling backward, my feet slipping on the slick stone. I fell hard, scraping my palms against the rough surface. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. I had to escape. I had to get away from here. I turned and ran, the fog pressing against me like a suffocating blanket. Every step I took felt heavier, the air thick with an unnatural chill that made it hard to breathe. The sound of my footsteps was drowned out by something worse, a soft, guttural growl, so close it felt like it was right behind me. I couldn't outrun it. I could hear it now, its claws scraping against the stone, its breath heavy and labored as it followed, always just a step behind. The shadows stretched longer and longer, reaching for me like tendrils, and I could feel them closing in, suffocating me, trapping me in the very place I had once crossed without a second thought. The bridge was no longer just a structure. It was a prison. I reached the end of the bridge again, but it wasn't the safety I had hoped for. The fog had thickened so much that I couldn't see anything past a few feet in front of me. My pulse raced, panic rising as I realized there was no way out. I was cornered. It was too late. The growl grew louder, more feral, echoing through the dense fog. The shadow loomed larger, its form taking shape in the mist, twisted, elongated, like something that didn't belong in this world. The creature was here. I turned to face it, my legs trembling beneath me. The air was thick with the weight of its presence. I could feel it closing in, wrapping around me like a noose. The whispers in my mind grew louder, more frantic, urging me to run, to hide, but it was too late. It stepped into the dim light of my broken flashlight's beam, its eyes glowing like twin orbs of flame. Its body was twisted, a grotesque mass of shifting shadows, its claws long and black, dripping with something dark and slick. The smell of decay filled the air, sharp and nauseating. I couldn't move. The creature tilted its head, its eyes never leaving mine, and I saw something in them, something ancient and cold. It wasn't just hunting me. It was toying with me, savoring the fear, feeding off it like a parasite. The shadows around us seemed to grow, to twist and pull at the edges of my vision. And then it spoke. And the words were like ice, cold and final, freezing me in place. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I wanted to run, but my body refused to obey. I was frozen, caught in the gaze of something that wasn't human, something that had no mercy, no compassion. In the stillness of the fog, I heard something, soft at first, but growing louder. The whisper again. It wasn't just in my mind this time. It was coming from the creature, from the depths of the darkness. Run. But I couldn't. The shadows had me. The darkness had me. There was no escaping. The last thing I felt was the coldness of its claws, sinking deep into my skin, pulling me into the void. And then, nothing. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.